tuning in,
Peace,
thank you
and
so
once
much for
again,
joining us.
Sheriff
You are
of the
watching
Templars,
or
we
listening
really
to The Angel Rock
appreciated
with
that,
myself, Lorilei Potvin, your host.
craftsman.
Just a few things
Well,
before we
who's this
introduce
Nicole?
our
I can't actually
fantastic
see a
guest.
thing.
This is
He
the
is a
one with the
returning
two.
guest, and you guys
This is the one
loved
with
him,
the
so I'm
two
so glad he's back. But
ears on
if
it.
you've never
This
tuned
is
into The
Oh,
Angel Rock
type
before,
stuff. Yeah.
my name
yeah,
is Lorilei
yeah.
Potvin. Like I
It's
said, I am a
agate, isn't
Canadian
it?
psychic
Agate,
medium.
wow.
I'm a crystal
It's
Reiki
black
energy
agate, and
healer, an
again,
Akashic
that
Records
Wow.
practitioner,
one of the pieces
spiritual
that I
teacher and
suspect
mentor,
is
and
a
I'm
little
also a
bit
nurse.
earlier.
In the show
And
The
then the
Angel Rock, I
actual
feature all
temple of
aspects, I
crosses
say, of the
inlaid in gold were
supernatural,
probably
and it
put in
goes
the 12th
anywhere from
century when
something
they
within
took
the
possession of it,
paranormal to
or
ETs,
That's
to
12th,
beautiful.
13th
UFOs.
century.
We also
But
talk
no,
about the
that's a
power of the
very, very
mind,
nice
power of
quality
positive
thing.
thinking,
No,
energy, chakras,
really
you
good
name it.
little
We talk
piece
about
that
all
is.
these things.
Very, very delicate.
And I have
So
wonderful,
much.
amazing
Who's
people
this
from all
one?
over the world
Hamilton.
as my guests. Through the work that they're doing,
This
they
is
make a
beautiful.
positive
This is
change for
another one with the
humanity. Now, the
gyro
guest that I
gold.
have this
Oh
evening
my gosh.
definitely is one of those
Look at
people.
that.
He has
And
two
then on
books
the
out. We're going
side,
to touch on
it's
his
difficult
second
to
book,
see, but
which we should have done the first
No, we
show.
see them.
But I'll
there's
explain
the
that in a few
Awesome.
minutes.
typo, the
His
Temple
name is Paul
Cross.
Anthony Wallis. We're going to read a
Wow.
bit of his
Again,
biography for you.
beautiful.
He's a researcher,
Exquisitely
speaker,
beautiful.
leadership coach, healer in
High,
Chinese traditions,
prized
mentor, and
items
author of
with,
books
we
of
don't know what they were
spirituality and
used for,
mysticism.
but
He
they
researches
weren't
the
used
world's
by brutes.
mythologies for how they speak to our origins as a
These
species and our
sophisticated
potential today as
people
human
who had
beings.
taste and
And I said,
style,
I'm reading from
and
my post actually
they
with the
appreciated
banner, and
all
we're going to be
these
talking
things,
about
and
those things and many things.
it's
Welcome,
evident
Paul. I'm
here.
so
It's
glad
not.
to have you back.
It's there to see. It's not all just
I
about
can't hear you,
swords and
Paul. I don't know if you're on
swimming.
mute,
No.
maybe.
The
I don't
glove
know.
flagons of ale and
I'll have to
wine.
see.
Well, if you
There you
think
go.
about it,
Hi, is
temples
that
came from
better?
all
I
walks
can
of
hear
life,
you. Yes.
you
All
know,
right.
and they
Talk
brought
about
their
Lorilei,
it.
skills
thank you.
with them.
People
Thank you so much for having me on your
You
show
know,
again.
there was a
Well,
place
thank
for
you. I was
everyone
going to say,
within the order.
I actually
And
talked
you
to you
look at
before
just some
we
of the
just
pieces you
started,
guys
and
own,
Joe said,
and
well,
that
maybe
is
he doesn't have his
essentially
headset in. So
prime
I'm glad that
example and
works now.
proof that there were like
I'm
amazing
so glad to
artisans
have
and
you
all of
here.
that,
Hopefully, my
you know,
internet is better.
within
We
the
just
order.
got upgraded.
Not
So hopefully there's
only
no
the
delay.
artisans
So
themselves,
thank you so
All
much for
right.
coming
the
back.
So
general
far, so good. Oh, it's a
appreciation
pleasure.
throughout
I
the
really
whole
enjoyed our
order of
last
what was
conversation.
quality and what
So
was
did
what
I.
you
I've been
perceive
saying
as
to
fine
everybody
quality
on
art
the air
in
and
those
off the
days.
air, and I know you're going to
Because
be on
sort
my
of
partner Dell's show,
99%
so
of the
thank you.
people in the world at that
But I've
time
been
were
saying to them, what a
making do
pleasure
with
to
the
talk
most
to you about
basic
the topics we
bits
talked
and
about
wooden
last time.
bowls and wooden
And you're very
vessels,
aware of our
was
limitations
just
on at least this
inconceivable for the
platform where we're
normal
streaming
man of
from
that
with video, which
period
is
to
YouTube.
be able
And
to
I should
have
remind
luxury
people, I
items. The
forgot,
world didn't
and I
work
do need
like
to let
that. It
people know
was
our
it
main
was
United Public Radio
subsistence, or you
Network
made it
channel
yourself.
at the
The
moment is completely
tiny
gone
proportion of
bye-bye, not through
society
any
that was
fault of
able
our
to
own.
buy
But where
that
you will
type
find
of
us right
item,
now
you know,
is on,
you're
I
really
believe
looking
it's,
at sort of
UFO
church level
Radio
money, or
Network. You can find
Regal.
us still on
regal.
YouTube. Please join us
Definitely,
over there because I
the
keep an eye
I
on
mean,
the
average
most
chat and
people
I
had
try and make you part
wooden,
of the
wooden
show.
food
We
bowls.
also have
You'd
a
have
new
wooden
channel, and because it's
vessels because
new, I've
wood
had a
is
little bit of trouble trying to
ubiquitous
find
and
it, so you may not be able
it
to. I
doesn't
do.
take
I don't know if I have the link in the
big
banner, but it's
skills
called
to do that.
UFO
But
UFO
You just look at how
Gods and
delicate they are, and
Extraterrestrials.
they
But
still
I'll be
manage
on
to
the United,
withstand the
sorry,
test of time.
UFO
You know, they're
Paranormal
still,
Radio
they exist,
channel on YouTube. So
right?
please
yeah,
pop over
Well,
there
that's
if you
the
want to
thing.
watch the
They
show and be part of
exist,
the
and
conversation.
really,
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, I forgot. I
firstly,
got to
they
get that out of the
shouldn't
way there
because
so to
they're so
remind them.
delicate.
Mm-hmm.
Lauralee, I
You
should
know,
quickly correct a little something in
wherever
the intro you
they've
gave me,
been
which
Please
was
since
do.
they were
fabulous,
manufactured,
with one detail
whatever countries they
altered.
passed through
You said
before
I
they ended
was
up in
a
Portugal,
healer in the
whoever has
Chinese
had them
tradition,
throughout their
and
whole
there'll be people
existence
watching who'll say,
always
Paul doesn't
valued
know
them.
anything about
Nobody
Chinese
I
healing.
thought
achieved
that.
anything
Thank
It's
you,
in
actually
Paul.
terms.
it's
Because
in
that's
the
the funny
Christian
thing, you only
tradition.
need to knock
I
yourself before you
Not
can
to be
gone. I
not
mean,
to
they
be
are
in any
so
way
delicate.
tribal about it,
You
because
know,
I
it's
find that there are
they've been
modalities in every
appreciated
culture and they overlap
throughout
in the most
however many
amazing way.
ownerships
But
they've
I
had
just thought
over
I
the
should
last 1,000 or so
No, you
years.
should. There's a big difference.
No,
And I
they're
apologize. I
amazing.
don't know if
Like
that was the
pieces they
bio
would
I
use
got
for
sent to me. I think it
anointing
was.
oils.
And
no
I
worries.
It Yeah.
He's, you know what,
Especially
and
the
he's amazing, you
double-handed
guys,
one.
Gavin Lee
That
Davies.
just
He sends me the most
Well, there's just
amazing
the-
in a
guests.
ritual.
And he does all
On
the
the
work for
amethyst
me.
one,
So
it
I
is quite
apologize. Thank
possible
you
that
for
there's a
correcting
lid
me, because
missing
people
off
be
this.
asking you about
The
all
red
kinds of
gold
Chinese.
I
You've
know.
got an item with
I take my hat off to
that
Chinese
simulates
expertise, but I'm
the,
not an expert in that area.
Thank
the
you. Well,
the
you know what?
mosque,
We're
isn't
going
it,
to start
Hamilton?
there,
In
because I want to hear
Is it the
more
Alaska
about
moss, the
what you do. We're going to
gold?
get into all kinds of things
There
as we
is
did the last time.
another
So what
agate
does
vessel
a
that's like
Christian
a
healer
little
do? What
more
exactly
like, I
modalities
don't
do
know how
you
to
use?
describe it.
And I'd love
It's
to hear
more
more
like a
about that.
sealed perfume
Sure.
jar.
Well, I learned
Oh.
about
It's
healing
got a
in
gold
a Christian
top on it.
context.
It's got a
I
little
became a
dome
Christian
gold
when I was
top
about
with a
17 years
tiny
old,
little
and it was
cross.
at a time
And I don't
of
know, it's not
what we would call
impossible to
renewal, where
believe that
people
it's
were having very powerful
replicating something
spiritual
on Temple Mount.
experiences,
Mhm.
and we were all
the
trying to
right
get our heads around
period,
what this meant,
and
how it
very
was
similar to
happening,
what
and we
Carl
were
just
seeing a
showed
lot
you
of
there.
what you
It's an
might call
earlier agate
spontaneous
again
healing
got
happening.
memories of
Although
it
they were,
from the
I say
Crusader
spontaneous, they
Templar
were healings
period. So
by
all of
intention
the
as well,
vessels
where
really
somebody
do
might
tie in
come
together
with a physical
remarkably
problem,
well.
and then
Like
we would do
ancient
various
time
things to
souvenirs.
try and draw upon
To the Holy
divine
Land, yeah.
power to address the problem.
You
And,
know
and
what
so in
we've
the
got to
church
do?
I started going to as a
I've got
teenager,
to do a quick
there was
station
a
ID.
lady
If you're
who
listening to
started
us, you're
seeing in an
listening to The
eye that
Outer
had
Realm with
no
Michelle DeRoche,
optic
myself, Amelia
nerve.
Pisano, and the
And we
two
had to get our
amazing
heads around
Carl
how
Cookson
that
and
was happening.
Hamilton
But you
White are
asked
here
about the
tonight with us
modalities. The
on
modalities we were
107.7
learning were
FM or
modalities used
105.3
by different
FM in
cultures
New
around the
Orleans.
world for
We
thousands
are
of years.
United
Things
Public
like
Radio. And this is
placing your
partially
hands
sponsored by
over the
Folgers
affected
Coffee Crystals.
area
Thank you,
with
Folgers.
the intention
Thank you,
of bringing a
Folgers.
healing energy into
Hey,
that
thank
part
you,
of the
Folgers.
body.
There we
And
go.
I've done
Thank
that many
you.
times over the
Oh
decades
boy,
and
Hamilton, just
seen
get right in there.
amazing things happen right in front of
I'm
our
pretty sure
eyes.
they make tea.
Reiki specialists, of course, do exactly the
Actually,
same.
I was
before
just going to say
Hamilton
that
shows you,
I
I'll
was
show,
Yeah,
show you my
it's the
sigils,
same
but
thing.
Folgers
yes,
coffee
right?
choice
Different
of vessel
language,
for this
Yes.
evening.
and maybe a different
Oh,
you.
philosophical
I
framework,
almost fell
but
off my
you look
chair.
at what's being
Wow.
done, how it's
Yeah, that
being
is
done, the
just,
intention,
That's
the
wow.
result, and
exquisite.
it's the same
Yeah,
thing.
you
Another
can't even
very
speak when
interesting
you look at
thing, and we
something
learned
like
this
that.
from
Now, what
modeling
is
our
this
practice and
piece,
what we saw
aside from the
Jesus do in
obvious
the
that it's a
Gospels,
chalice
is speaking
for
to
Folgers?
conditions as if they are intelligent
You know
entities.
all about it.
So speaking to
So
a
I can't even
fever and
see why
saying,
I'd
that's
be up. I'm
enough of
just
that,
going to
you
plug
go
in
now.
Yes.
nothing.
And I learnt this in the
It's the
context of the
chalice,
church,
you know,
and
the
then
one,
as I
the one that we
carried on
referred
growing and
to
traveling,
with
realized there are people
the
in
chalice
every
held by
culture, in every spiritual
the
tradition,
character
who has
in
very
short cathedrals
similar
in Melchizedek.
practices.
Agreed.
And
The
there's
one
a
where
funny
I
moment
on
in the
top
gospel
on screen
where
before the
Jesus,
program
he's
gets
been traveling
finished.
around doing things like this, doing entity
No,
removal,
Yeah,
healing,
that one, no.
and a
No.
couple of
This
his
one holds.
team
This one
members
No,
come
holds
up to him and
fire.
they say, we found someone else doing this, but they weren't one of us, so we told them to
And I
stop
said,
it.
Why?
And
you
Jesus said, why?
Yeah.
What on earth did you do that for?
I've lost
and we're
And so I
special, so
take
we
my
get to
lead
see
from
it,
that I applaud
along with 2
anyone who's
million other
learning that
people.
we are
I
amazing
can't actually see,
beings,
honestly.
and
I
that
can see
divine
nothing
power
on
is
my screen
amazing
at all
power,
other than a little
and
tiny
that there
picture
are
of me
ways we can
and
just plug into it
I've gone.
and learn how to
No,
self-heal
You're
and heal
You're going
others
to have to
in ways
replicate
that are
those
very, very
hats on your
powerful, often very,
site
very
as
quick,
well and
and
sell
often in
them.
ways that we actually can't explain. The thing happens, and then we have to work out, how did that happen? And I'm very happy to be part
I
of
was
an
just
international
killing time
learning
before you rang
community
us up
through,
and
well, through
sprung
platforms
up on
like this,
one of the
Lorilei, really, as we
Facebook
compare notes
messages
and find
on
out
one of
from
the Oak
one another what's going on.
Island pages or
I
groups.
have to agree with
There's
you
a
because when you
guy
were
who actually
describing about the
makes
laying on
Oak
hands,
Island
and I would
scenes
call it
out
the
of
aura
Lego.
or energy
It was
field,
just
right, over top of the affected
astonishing.
area. And
That's
I
Yeah.
gotta
do
have a,
something
it's,
called
you know
crystal
what?
Reiki,
We're in a
which involves
pandemic.
some of
People are stuck at home. We're getting
the
creative.
sigils. But
So
you know what?
next thing you know, they'll
Sometimes
be
I
making
forget
chalices with
because it's so
Lego.
powerful. And I always tell
Sword
people, because
lock,
they'll say,
yeah.
"Oh my God, you're
I
so
would love
amazing."
to see a
No,
Lego
it's
version
not
of me
me.
in
I
Carl.
am just
That
the
would be
vessel. I say,
fantastic.
I'm the
Just a
mailman.
very
It
small
could
We're
happen.
delivering from
Lego,
God,
but, you know,
or whatever their
Or maybe
belief system is. For
bobbleheads.
me, it's God. And I say, I'm channeling that energy through. Oh, I'm getting
That could be as
goosebumps.
big as
I
a
always say
little
that's my
chalice.
sign for truth.
it's
And
got,
I'm
yeah, there's got to
focusing.
be
And the other thing
creative
is,
feat.
the
If
use of
someone had
color.
dreamt up doing
I
Oak
work with,
Island in
there's
Lego, I
healers
think
Oh,
they ought to do
wonderful.
me and
guide that
Carl and
that's part
some
of their
kind of car
job, if you
holding a
will,
chalice.
to
That
help
would
and
be
assist,
You
completely
right?
probably
So
brilliant.
I agree with
Simpsons
you
character.
about that. And I love, because I
Can
don't
make
think
a
I've ever heard it
suggestion,
referred to
Hamilton? You should write a
as
children's book and
Christian
your
type of
adventures
healing. And I
together of
love
you and
it because
Carl
actually what you're
towards,
describing
geared
is
towards
many
children
of
so
the
they
things
can
that I
learn
do
about
myself in
the
my healing
history.
work. So I love it
Minus
that
the
you
wine
shared
and the
that.
whiskey, though.
Now, something that you will have seen and that I learned originally in this Christian context is that if someone had a problem and they wanted help, they wanted ministry for healing, people would gather around them, and before doing anything, if people were laying on hands, you look around the circle and you watch everyone will do this.
He couldn't eat a full one.
And you realize they've just slowed their breathing. Now, nobody taught us to do that. We just did it instinctively because we're trying to get ourselves into a more receptive state. And I've since learned that controlled conscious breathing is used in ancient traditions, shamanic traditions, mystical traditions all around the world as a way of heightening our state of consciousness. And so I've learned that from various mystics in the Orthodox tradition. And of course, now I discover it's in Buddhist traditions, it's in Native American traditions. You can find it everywhere. That controlled conscious breathing alters our state, alters our brain waves, and all of a sudden we're able to perceive things and do things that in our normal rush and worry we don't do. But it's something that's accessible to all of us. And in the Scars of Eden, I talk a little bit about language and translation and how
it's just been for
retranslating things can totally reframe how we see something. And we tend to listen to figures like Buddha or Jesus through a religious ear. And the moment you decode it and try and listen in more neutral language, you realize they're saying something far more accessible, far more powerful, far more universal than you at first think. And the first sermon that Matthew's Gospel tells us Jesus toured with was a sermon that said the amazing power of the source is available to every one of us.
It's gone mad.
When you translate the religious language out of it, that was the message. And then he went around demonstrating that. So it was understanding that and following that that led me into experiences of healing, self-healing, entity removal,
it's
and
quite
all the rest
dull,
of
the
it.
actual service finish.
I love it. Just one sec, because I'm going to go a little further with that. I want to give a shout out to Zach Man and Michelle Pratt that are in the chat. Welcome, everybody. We're glad to have you here. And Michelle is from Australia. She just said, "Good day, y'all."
Good day.
So I'm glad she's here. She's
if you remember in the
found
first
us by
series,
accident.
the
I think she did
chalice
actually a
where
couple
John
months
C.
ago, and she's been hanging out with us. We love having everybody here. So if anybody else is listening live, come on, pop over to the YouTube channel. Like I said, we'd love to have you here. And I agree with you about these healing modalities. I can't tell you, the last time when you were on the show, it was about a month or probably about 4 to 6 weeks ago. Many of the things that you've said, that you've shared from both your books, Escaping from Eden and now The Scars of Eden, we're going to talk about both. Those are things that I say in my practice when I put on my spiritual teaching hat, if you will. And I've said this so many times about I believe the human body is completely capable of healing itself. But what we encounter, whether through its trauma, belief systems, emotional blockages, whatever it may be, that it tends to conglomerate. Everything is energy, and that's how we get dis-ease. But I have shared that show that we did because of many of the things you talked about, things I teach about as well, about the potential we have as human beings that we have been told has never been possible. What really stuck with me, I enjoyed every second of our last show that we did, Paul. But when you were talking about that almost savant-like system and getting into, did they create a really higher version of us and realize that no, we didn't want to be subservient? I'm going to get you to explain what us is, and I know you're going to be much more
cups or utensils, let's say, than
better equipped,
everyone
better
else.
verbiage, if you will, to explain this concept.
I would only imagine
and the reason reason why is
Right.
because when we
think
see
the
people that have maybe
vows
had a head
were
injury or
across
a
the
near-death
order, and
experience,
Right.
you know,
it's
if you
like it's
start getting the
switched on, a
grandmaster
light switch,
getting
and
chicken
all these
dinners
abilities
and the
are
lads on the
accessed. I'd love you to
battlefield as you
explain
getting
more about
I
dragged
that,
have,
what you
through.
I
found
have
in
to
your
ask because
research.
some people,
Sure.
would maybe
Yes, the
wonder,
syndrome is called
was there a type of
acquired
hierarchy,
savant
just like you would have,
syndrome. It's
you know,
studied by
like the
neurologists
king,
around
for
the world.
example,
It's
like the
genuine
head of the
peer-reviewed
order.
science.
Would he
Right.
be? You try to
Darrell
tell people, no, it
Trefford,
really was
professor
very
at
humble.
Marion University, I think,
Everybody
has
was pretty.
tracked more than
you know,
70 cases
They
of
lived
acquired
like
savant
monks, and
syndrome. And the
when you
pattern
talk about
is when somebody
just
has
for
a head
example,
injury, usually,
accommodation
or
when
a
they lived
central
in a
nervous
keep
system
in a
event,
castle or that,
a stroke.
they would have just had a chair and
And when they
bit of a
emerge
fire.
from it,
They wouldn't have had
they
fancy
have
furniture
heightened cognitive
or items. They'd have had
abilities.
coffers
Suddenly
and
they are
chests
fluent in a
to store
language they weren't
important
fluent in
chattels in
before,
and
or
sword
they can play an
boxes.
instrument they
But
couldn't play before,
they
or
didn't
they're
say, well, let's
brilliant
get some
at
nice lighting
mathematics,
and
or their
torches,
memory
and
has just
everything was
gone to the
practical.
max.
And
So
we
Orlando
need a
Searle
carpet,
would
let's
be
get
an
an
example
orchestra
who
carpet. They wasn't
was hit
into
in the head
that
by a
sort of stuff.
baseball when
And
he was 10 years
if,
old, and it concussed
if
him.
a grandmaster
Well, when he came to
was
being
seen to
a
be
10-year-old boy,
having
he finished
fine
the
wines
match,
and
and he
dishing
didn't
out
tell his mum
rubbish
what had
wines to
happened.
his
But he
minions, I
suffered
think that would
from terrible
completely
headaches for about a year. And then
discredit
when they
him,
receded,
Mm-hmm.
he found he
destroy any
had this
credibility for
incredible
the
capacity in
integrity.
calendar
I'm sure the
mathematics.
guys
So that
that
if you
Tom
ask him how
lived
many
as
Thursdays
pious and as
between the
humble,
29th of April
modest
1953 and the 3rd of March
Minimalists, basically.
1964,
Pardon?
he'll tell you just like that.
Minimalists.
Ask him what he was doing on the
they
23rd of November 1988. He'll tell you
he
just like that.
survived on
And he did not have that
good
ability
food. One
before.
funny thing about the
There was
food,
an
we was
amazing
talking
study,
to
I think
a
it was
guy,
with
it was
Dr.
Tim Wallis
Drago who
Murphy
performed
years
this
ago when we
study,
went to
where he
Taiwan.
brought in
He
a
said one
number
of the
of
things the
art
Templars
critics
were,
to
they used
evaluate
to
the
live longer
art
than a lot of
of
the
a
general
particular
population.
female
And
artist.
people
And they looked at,
speculated
I
why.
think it
One
was
of the things he said
22
was they
paintings that she
always
had produced.
meticulously washed
They were all
their
shown
hands
them
before food. It
randomly,
was
out
almost
of sync, out of
ritualistic.
timeline, out of
It
any
wasn't just, I'm
context,
just
and they
washing it to
just
keep
noted
clean.
their different remarks.
It's
And then
ceremonially.
afterwards,
Because
all
you
the
know, like when you get a
remarks were
shower,
correlated,
you get a
and
shower
all
or
these
a
different
bath,
art critics
and
from
you
different
come out
schools
and
of art
you just feel, I know your body's
had
cleaner,
essentially
but it's
tracked
more than
an
that.
increase
There's something about
in
anointing
every
yourself,
measure of this
completely
lady's
immerse
skill
yourself
level
in
and
water, and when you
creativity.
come out,
And what they had not been
there's a
told
feeling
is
of
the
elation
timeline they
there
were
that
following was the
comes out
timeline
of,
of her dementia.
having that
And
Wow.
so as her brain
process
became more
occurred to you.
damaged,
Maybe
her
when
skill level
they,
was
washed their
increasing.
hands, there's
And her
something going. And
creativity and
besides
her
that,
intelligence
logical and natural
artistically. And when they
health
reflected on
benefits of,
that,
not
I think it
contaminating
was
your food, because if you
Dr.
held
Bruce
bread,
Miller who studies it as well in the
bread
States,
and,
said
stuff like
we
that,
appear to be looking at a
grains and porridges, but very
disinhibition
simple
of some of the
food,
brain's
but
visual system.
just like
Well,
Cistercian
any
monks,
layperson listening to that
they
would
live
say,
on, very basic
disinhibition. Well, what are the inhibiting systems doing there? What are the inhibitors doing there? How did they get there?
So
And these neurologists are asking the same question. How come there are higher abilities in our brains in the off position? It's absolutely puzzling. But our ancestors say they have an answer for that. And the answer is we all have these abilities.
You don't have to feed it.
They are all in the off position most of the time because those who engineered our ancestors adapted us that way. They had engineered a being who was too intelligent, too conscious to be managed as a workforce. And so they found a way of dumbing us down to the point where we can only respond to our five physical senses, or we're dependent on an authority telling us what's what. And they found that helpful.
They probably did.
But the story...
Because what I want to add to that is, I have always asked since I was a little girl, why do people need a leader?
I think
why
the
can't
good
they
thing
think
is
for
yes.
themselves? I've always asked this. I've never understood. And people naturally do this. Doesn't matter what situation, you've got a group of people, whether it's fictitious on television or you might see it in a it's not really reality TV. We all know, but fake reality, like Survivor, doesn't matter where it is. People will gravitate towards one person who takes the lead, and everybody follows, right?
That's absolutely right, and it is fascinating and it is mystifying. I mean, on the one hand, you might say, well, that's just a natural specialization of skills, isn't it? But I don't know. I think in our culture, we take it a little further than that. I mean, you only have to see a couple of despots or autocrats in your life to know we take it a lot further than that. You start suffering because of legislation that disadvantages a whole tranche of people, and you realize we take it a lot further than that. And again, just to bring it back to Jesus, there's a famous quote in which he said, "You have no superiors. Call no one on earth your leader. You have no leaders. No one on earth your father. You have no fathers. You are all peers. You're all brothers and sisters." And that was the vision he presented to us. But the stories of our ancestors say that the earliest experience we ever had of being governed, that kind of leadership, was an experience of humans being governed by another species. And that's the story of the ancient Sumerians. The Scars of Eden argues that's the story of the Bible when it's properly translated. Greeks, Nordics, Indians tell the same story in the Vedas, and then the Popol Vuh I was just going to come to, because they are so transparent in the way they talk about visitors coming from another planet, having a long sequence of experiments to get a species that was intelligent enough to serve them, but not so intelligent that they become a threat. And so they hardwired us as best they knew how to be led. Hardwired us for leadership. And you can see that impulse in almost every culture. And I find it very interesting now, having come to the conclusion that that is our real history, then going back to the teachings of people like Jesus and realizing they're trying to undo that hardwiring by saying you have no superiors, by teaching us to stop sacrificing to those above us. We need to learn to serve one another, not serve superiors. And many of the spiritual greats through history have reframed the whole idea of serving God as meaning we serve one another.
I think it would be
we serve each other when we need help. We serve each other by loving and caring for one another. We serve one another by how we treat the vulnerable in our society. And that's the only place that the word service should really be being used. We shouldn't be using that concept to stratify our society into superiors.
No, we have to wait till you hit like season 5 and you get a little bit more creative.
I don't know if I agree with this, but I can see it happening. She says we need a leader as we need someone to blame when it all goes wrong.
Oh,
I can't.
I don't know if I agree with this. But yeah, people do. I guess depending on what type of
person
are and personality. Not that I would ever take. But even as a child, going back to this, I've always recognized that we are all the same. Like we all have the same physical part. Well, I mean, aside from male and female, but you know what I'm saying. And I agree with you that nobody has anything more special than anybody else. Yes, we all have special gifts and talents.
Fast food in Europe is considerably different. But yes, we are all part of each other. Lived in Australia,
and when you were talking about, we're going to get to the day
had to be changed
and why you feel this way, because I totally concur with your research and what you've shared in your book.
You know, you don't get fuel injected chicken.
You said you believe there was a human being. You want to call it 1.0 before what we're presently at.
You really
and
actually
who are
get
they for people that may not be aware?
I was sort of amazed eating on the run. It was just like, this is
the ancient Sumerians who told this story called the Sky people, the ancient Hebrews who began the Hebrew tradition and the Hebrew scriptures called them the powerful ones. The Mesoamericans called them those who engineer. The Vedas called them the kings. And essentially what we're talking about is a species with advanced tech who arrived on planet Earth thousands of years ago before
They
Homo
are
sapiens
good. I'm not gonna
sapiens,
lie. I
as
love
we know
French
ourselves
fries
to
there.
be,
The French
had
fries and a milkshake, but
happened.
they have to go
And they
together. You gotta
arrived
dip them.
on a
And they're
devastated planet
packaged
that
right now,
needed
too.
recovery,
It's perfect.
rehabilitation, and then they worked with a primate ancestor to engineer
Anything in a
us,
package.
and
I
they
didn't know
colonized
that.
us and governed our planet for a long time before handing over to viceroys and successors, and the rest, as they say, is history. And it's a story that repeats all around the world, and it was the correlations of those stories that first got my attention, and realized there's a very interesting story that's been hidden in plain sight for a long time.
And a bag of chips then was about,
Right. So now,
I'm guessing like
what was the impetus for
15
writing
pence a
your
bag.
second book? We talked about your first book.
McDonald's
It was
opened up, you got
because
this
that,
little
and I'm going to share
packet
this quickly. I
of like
shared in the last show, but
six
our
skinny
mutual
chips
friend
in
and
for
who you
30.
work with, Gavin Lee Davies,
I
with
the extra
publishing,
large.
he had
You've got to
introduced
go
me to
bust,
Paul in
man. You've got
October,
no
and things got
chance
crazy.
that'll
So by the time
survive.
I finally got a
And
chance to have
I
you
was so
on,
wrong.
You
you
did.
already
Look
had
at
your
them
second
now.
book out,
They're
and it was
very
when you were on
tasty.
about
Their
6
French
weeks
fries are
ago.
tasty.
It was
Yeah,
ready to pre-order,
Yeah,
but
their
you can
French
buy it
fries
now,
are
right?
tasty.
Yes, The Scars of Eden is available now. You can go Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Hive, wherever books are sold, and you'll be able to order your copy right now.
Yes, yes. And the thing is, I want to make sure, I always get the title to your first book wrong. I know it's not entering, Escaping from Eden, is that it?
That's right, Escaping from Eden. Yeah. I know sometimes people struggle with it because it's such a counterintuitive title. Why would you want to escape from Eden?
Okay, why would
it's already there?
Well, obviously, I mean, the word Eden, we hear it, we think, that sounds lovely, we think paradise. But the moment you start doing some translation work and reading the root meanings of the words in these texts, it emerges very quickly that Eden wasn't a paradise. It was an enclosed zone where our ancestors were genetically engineered. And that was where we had our existence originally. We would go out from it, I believe, to do mining work for those who had colonized us. And we're told in the book of Genesis that there were some key mineral deposits conveniently close to the enclosed zone of Eden. But that's essentially what it was. It's where we emerged as Homo sapiens sapiens, but it's also the place of our earliest traumatic memories. And some of what happened there, I talk about in Escaping from Eden and explain why it's not a paradise we would want to return to. It's a place of very painful memory where we just have fragmentary memories of what happened to us in that place.
For you guys, as we count
Are you
down
able
to
to give a little
the
hint
end of the
for
show,
our
all this great
listeners and watchers? I don't want you to give it all away because I want them to go out and buy your amazing book, but maybe a little hint.
Yeah.
What are you talking about here?
So we've talked a little bit about the fact that there was a real push and pull among our ancient colonizers as to how intelligent they wanted the human race to be. So they began with a primate, and then they began adapting that, and there was a faction that wanted to keep us like a slave species, who wanted us so unintelligent that we didn't even know we were naked, but intelligent enough that we could do work for them, much like an elephant might work or a horse might work.
Really, but we will.
And then there was another faction that became a little bit closer to us, who were more hands-on in the genetic engineering, who wanted us not to be a race of clones or drones, but wanted us to be a fertile species, intelligent and conscious enough to have a happy life, because he found that what they had produced, and in the Sumerian stories it's Enki who does these experiments. In the Hebrew it's the serpent who does these experiments, and they found that before we were fertile, able to reproduce, intelligent enough, conscious enough to enjoy life, we were all depressed. and that actually wasn't good.
I don't think they ever
And
closed.
so it was that
it was
faction
just
or
for a
that
month.
entity that said, no, I want to upgrade these. And there's a big fight over it, and he breaks ranks, he upgrades us, and then there's a huge stink and a conflict among the Sky people / powerful ones / those who engineer. And that conflict is repeated in other
that would be great,
ancestral narratives. The Greeks have a version of this story where Prometheus has made us too smart, given us too much tech, and so Zeus bombs us back into a pre-civilization state, so we have to re-evolve. In Genesis, you've got Genesis 11, the Babel story, where we've actually developed into a civilization, a spacefaring civilization, and then we are bombed out of that condition and damaged so severely. It's like we suffer a collective stroke, and we are back in a state where we no longer have the power of speech. So this is a phenomenally violent action against us, and the way the translation runs at the moment, it's God who does that to us, because we built a building too tall.
If things open up,
we've infringed building codes, and you read that and you think that can't be right. Well, it isn't right. Do the translation work, and you realise our ancestors were caught in a crossfire between different ET demographics, warring over what should happen with regard to Project Earth and Project Humanity. And if you imagine some poor primate going through this life cycle, and down the generations becoming a slave species, and then down the generations we are intelligent and conscious and we have a good life, down the generations we build a civilization, and then all that is taken from us and we have to start again. Imagine living in a society like this, and you wake up tomorrow and we've all been so damaged that you can't communicate with your children anymore, you can't communicate with your doctor, and civilization collapses. These are phenomenal traumas. Think about the story of the flood, which is in Genesis 6 and in every culture around the world. To have your civilization wiped out like that, what greater trauma could there be? And our stories of creation, curated by so many different ancestral narratives, begin in the moment after that, when our ancestors are huddling for survival on what bits of land have survived this cataclysm. You put all that together and you think, these are not happy stories, and yet we put them all in children's Bibles and expect parents to read them to kids. There's another lovely story, darling. Have a good night's sleep. It does not really make sense, and children will tell you that. They will ask the questions. Why didn't God see what was going to happen? Why did he want to murder everyone with a flood? Why did he destroy that civilization? Why did he want us so stupid we didn't know we were naked? Why did he want there only to be males and to be lonely in the world? A child spots these, asks the questions, and in Escaping from Eden, I talk about suffering an ultimate frisbee injury that finally gave me the time to go back to those very obvious questions and realize these are essentially translation issues, and do the translation work, and this whole other story emerges.
Wow.
That is, I agree with every word that you're saying here, and
it's going to be a whole lot more
I
fun
think
coming. So
I came across this quite
all
by
the fans
accident when
and
I was
friends,
doing
Lost Relics,
I was doing paranormal research when we went through what we went through in our previous home. Not that I didn't believe in the paranormal. I always say it found us. We never went looking for it. So it was a full-time job, 12 to 18 hours a day. And I happened to be looking up the Nephilim, of all things, trying to find out more about this. And I'm probably not saying it right, depending on who pronounces it. I've heard it pronounced a million different ways, but then I came across about the Anunnaki and about the Dead Sea, and then if you look at it from above the earth, it's a black spar, there's high radiation levels, and excuse me, as I went deeper and deeper, I went, crap, this makes a heck of a lot of sense, and why do we not know about this? Now I know why, but
anything here goes to the
Queen. Why have we never heard this?
Well,
Exactly. And the Scars of Eden follows a number of stories showing how this information that was known by our ancestors came to be suppressed and hidden. I can give a couple of examples of how that happened. I mean,
I
one
don't
of
want to give it all away, but whatever you can, because when people hear these little tidbits and go,
but
oh,
guys,
goodness,
thank you for coming on, and I'm looking forward to your posts. So I do watch them when they come up. I've not been on social media a whole lot lately. Just trying to get onto
in the Hebrew
lighter
tradition.
feelings.
And that is that in the 6th century BCE, and there's a very wide scholarly agreement about this, in the 6th century BCE, all the scrolls and books that make up the Hebrew canon were edited. They were given a very heavy edit and a scissors and paste redaction to harmonize them and turn them into a continual God story, with God in the story from beginning to end. Because by the 6th century BCE, Judaism was firmly monotheistic, and its great contribution to the world was to say there is only one God, and that God is the cosmic source. And they wanted that to be the message of all these stories, except that some of these old stories were not God stories. Some of these old stories were retellings of the Sumerian stories of the sky people. And so when they translated out the powerful ones and the ones like the powerful ones and put the word God in all those texts,
also on Instagram. If you are interested in being on the show,
aspect of those stories, when it used the word
right now, so I apologize.
men
it does take me
or angels
a little bit of time to get to everyone.
for entities that were clearly not human, it hid the ET aspect of what was going on, and it was part of a great forgetting.
You're interested
there
in
is a great
joining
forgetting
us,
commanded
let
in
us
the
know.
Hebrew
Please
scriptures.
know we
The
are
Ten
booking to the
Commandments
end of the year.
begins.
So tune in next
You
week.
shall have only one powerful one.
Wednesday night,
Don't
doing
bow
some work
down
and
to the
Damien back
others.
to the
Don't
show,
even depict
and she
them.
will be discussing fairies and pagan
So that
portals
Elohim,
and,
the one
my
who's
gosh,
taken
there's
the
just a
name
wealth of
Yahweh,
information on it. Yeah,
wants his people to forget there are any others, except the stories roll on and you realize that Yahweh is in competition with the other powerful ones. And that's what makes sense of those stories. You get to Joshua, Moses gave the Ten Commandments. Joshua, his successor, comes along and says, cut yourself off from the powerful ones that your ancestors served in Mesopotamia. Don't work for the powerful ones that the Egyptians served or that the Amorites served. As for me and my household, we're only going to serve the entity called Yahweh. So again, there's an acknowledgement of these other powerful entities. But as soon as you use the word God to cover up these other entities, or in some texts, demons, false god, kings, chieftains, you lose the whole context. Now, when Christianity came along, there was a big debate as to what should be done with those old stories. Should the church re-endorse that 6th century edit and accept it all as God's story? And there were early church fathers who said absolutely not, because they're not God's stories. They're stories about something else. And the church fathers who said that were Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Irenaeus, absolutely foundational people. Origen is the father of hermeneutics, the principles of Bible interpretation. Irenaeus is the guy who came up with the phrase Old Testament and New Testament. So they're not fringy people. They were central people. And that was their view. But they got gradually silenced, excommunicated. The one who went the furthest with this was Marcion, and by 144 AD, he had been censured, excommunicated, declared a heretic. He had an enormous influence across Eastern Europe, and now we can't find a single page that he wrote because it all got lost. And then the process goes on as orthodoxy narrows and narrows, and as that narrowing got anchored to imperial power. So in 381, Emperor Theodosius settles a theological debate in the church on the basis that he's emperor.
So I will just wait
by doing that,
and we'll get
he's
the show
shown
started. And there she is.
we're in a feudal society here with God at the top, then the
Click
emperor,
on your microphone.
then sandwiched in the middle the bishops, and then all you people at the bottom. He'd anchored his own power, but it also declared anyone who was teaching a different story of origins is now not only a heretic, They're an enemy of the state, essentially. They're not going to get a teaching position. They probably won't get a public position.
Okay, yeah,
and that's when texts like the Gnostic Gospels began to be buried in the desert to stop them being destroyed. Because not only could you not teach them, you wouldn't want them in the public libraries, you wouldn't want them in your private library. They're going to be gotten rid of. And so the Nag Hammadi Desert became the hiding place for the Gnostic Gospels, which told stories of different explanations of origins, different explanations of who we are in the cosmos, what contact we're in, what we're capable of. So it was an editing out of these other stories. And even the process of putting everything into Latin as the Roman Empire went on,
I think you have to go into your settings.
Indigenous story got lost. Because if you didn't speak the local language, how could you understand the local stories and the local texts? And so we reached the point, for instance, where no one could read the Egyptian hieroglyphics anymore. Because that knowledge had been deliberately sidelined. I had a grandfather who was Welsh, and when he was a boy, if he spoke Welsh in public, he was committing a crime. Because the government in Westminster wanted to extinguish Welsh
it's 85
culture.
degrees here today.
And they thought if we force everyone to speak English, we can obliterate Welsh culture and Welsh memory. Well, that's exactly what the Roman Empire did with Latin. And it lost all that other knowledge, except, as I point out in the Stars of Eden, all that ancient knowledge goes somewhere. And has a way of resurfacing generations later.
Any comments that come in through any of the chats, you will also be able to see.
I love this, but it's getting me.
So just if they happen to start chatting, you'll be able to see anything that I'm seeing.
We've started this show with, we've been talking about, even from the last show we did.
You've been working, it's 85 degrees, that's nice.
When we don't learn.
Today's my day off. I get Wednesdays off.
Eras of history, or
wow. So I imagine you've been very crazy with everything going on.
We don't learn from our past
50,
mistakes.
60
we are
hour
destined
weeks.
to keep creating and making
it gets a little crazy.
the same mistakes over and over. And
I guess it
some of
doesn't
the
leave
stuff
much
you've
time
talked
for
about,
a whole lot of anything else either, does it?
In the words that we use.
No.
But it's so reminiscent of even
I know, right?
Today.
No shenanigans for Jim.
Go ahead.
Nothing but the demon
I do
rules on
think
the weekends.
that many of our ancestral stories were bequeathed to us
much how it goes. We
kind of as warnings
days a week
to the kind of things that can happen.
I'm doing radio shows
as orientations in how the world works.
You have to take some time.
And I think our world mythologies and
have some
ancestral
time for
narratives
yourself
are tremendous gifts, reminding us who we are, what we're capable of, but also some of the dynamics
I haven't had a whole lot of that.
government, whether we're being governed
25 hours
by ETs, as our ancestors were, or by fellow human beings. How do we prosper and thrive and remain conscious, intelligent, informed, and healthy in a world where being managed really is
our lovely guests? And since you're sort of a repeat offender here on the other realm, it was already easy to do.
Just some of the things you're talking about, like when you were talking
tonight we're
about
I guess talking about probably a lot of things, but the dark side of the paranormal
series.
Oh yes,
I know I've been doing this. You've doubled me on time. I've been doing this 18 years, and
that really sat with me because I was quite small when I'll be 56 in August.
That
I can't remember
message
when it came
me
out,
on
but
a
I was
daily
quite
basis.
Small.
So
and then as I got
have
older
you
and started to think about
everything
it,
that's
and
going on,
thinking,
without
how do
saying
we
the
know
C
that
word,
there's not maybe a
depressing
planet
everybody
out
with
there
everything
like
that's going
this,
on?
or there was
Do
something
you find
akin
that you're
to,
getting
or was this a
more
message,
calls or
or what
emails
was it?
because of
Right? Because
mindset and
humans
things
were
like that?
animals in this.
It get a lot
Absolutely.
of that.
I mean, the Planet of the Apes
it seemed to
really
pick up.
is quite
Actually,
profound
it's
if you
picked
look
up
at
in the last
the
2
basic
years.
story of it.
And not
but
not
a lot more people, you stop and think about it. There's a lot of depression and fear and anxiety. So of course, this is everything
to the Mark
that
Wahlberg
the negatives feed off of. So
because there are
they're like,
some
let's have
really
a party.
interesting layers in that. The basic story, of course, is of apes being genetically modified to be intelligent enough to be a useful slave species. So that's basically a retelling of these ancient narratives. We are being given an object lesson in what that looks like. some people might say we're also being given a little warning about what could happen if we start doing that kind of genetic modification. And
I find
when we hear about contemporary experiments, very quickly people are making references to the Planet of the Apes canon and saying, don't you remember how this worked out last time? But it really is a retelling of these ancient stories of our engineering.
And filling that
and there's a lovely
and
touch
in
the Mark Wahlberg
which of course
version of the story, where they go to the forbidden grounds of Kalima.
It leaves you open.
Now, first of all, that whole idea.
And unfortunately, the negatives, they take full advantage of that. They can make, as you well know, they can
that's for
make
real.
you see them as they wish to be perceived. So they can look
Area
like the
51
deceased person that they're trying to
but there are ancient archaeological sites,
and of course that opens a whole can of worms
buried
right
for
there.
their protection. So the official story goes, or we're not told about at all. And particularly in the Middle East,
when a negative energy
ancient
comes
technology,
in, however,
I believe,
that there are
exists,
small differences
found, but is now in a World Heritage site and can't be interfered with or known about. I don't want to say too much, but I am in touch with people who know that Allied forces have been involved in sequestering some of this.
One of the main differences you'll notice is that even though
taking it
the
back
image
to the
or the impression of the individual
or
is there,
analysis or
if you look
whatever
at the
it might
eyes,
be. Well, there it is in the Planet of the Apes.
tell
There's
you
this ancient
that
tech,
it's not
a crashed
because
craft,
they won't have, like say
at the
blue
sacred
eyes.
grounds
They'll
of
have
Kalima.
dark eyes, or they'll have red eyes.
And then when Marky Mark gets there, he found, oh my goodness, it's a crashed ship. No wonder
the eyes
the
are
apes
truly
don't
the
want
windows to the
anyone
soul.
getting here.
So if you
no wonder
look
they
in
don't
them
want the humans
and they're
knowing their
dark,
true
it's like,
history.
wait a minute,
And then he gets there and he rubs
That's
off the
not
grit
who
from
it's supposed to be, who
Kalima,
it's purporting to be.
and it says caution live animals. And the letters have been obscured by the dust of time. And he realizes he's in a place of genetic experimentation. All that is the story of us, along with the forgetting of what words mean.
So anyway,
Kalima is not a holy place. Eden is not paradise. Elohim is not God. It's all stories of caution live animals, genetic experiments in progress. So I love that touch in the Marky Mark version. But the whole
the characteristics are all.
I don't know about you, Lorilei, but
exactly.
I was allowed to watch Planet of the Apes when it came out all those years ago when we were both very small.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
But I had friends who weren't allowed to watch it.
Experience. A lot of people get into the field because
I don't think it was just because the
What
gorilla masks were scary. There is something very disturbing about that whole story, and I think we recognize it when we watch
I've always had abilities from the time I was born on. My grandmother raised me for the first 6 years, and it was a case of, right away she knew I could communicate with animals and elementals.
I think there was,
and of course, people on the other side, and as well as, of course, Michael's always been around. And so she tried to help me to understand that. And of course, I could see demons even at that, even at a small age. I could see them. But
whatever it is, yes, we know
it changed when I was about 5 or 6. I used to see them.
So yes, because there was a TV series I remember,
just
and
like most people see them, black mass.
Being able
that
to
sort of
watch
thing.
And really
but
enjoying
age,
it, but there was always
the angelic
an
eyes
uncomfortable
kicked
feeling,
in,
and I never really
I
put
can see
two
them in
and
their
two
true
together
form.
till we had this.
So Michael's like, "Don't be afraid. This is how we see them."
I do want to share something
so
with
you're seeing
you, though.
them through
There was,
angelic eyes.
it's a little bit off topic,
so
but not really when it comes to genetic modification.
I want you to study them. I want you to watch them. I want you to see what they do, how they work.
There is a video that a
because you're
friend
going
of
to need
mine,
it later
been
in
on my
life.
show
When you're a
before.
kid, you're thinking, "Oh, whatever." Michael says, "Do this."
And
you
he had
just do
shared it in a fellow paranormal group, asking,
so I've been helping people all through. I did it all through my teenage years. When I went in the military, I had to be careful because, military.
But the face of
but people that knew me would come to me. And I really didn't start doing the demonic removal until, even though I could see them, hear them, understand them, and communicate with them. Never really did anything until I died in 1988 in a motorcycle accident. And went to the other side. And Michael's there. My grandparents were there to greet me. And Michael was there, and he says, "You don't understand. This intercession, so to speak, is for you to understand who and what you are."
and how
I'm
they
like, yeah,
now
just
have the
me. And
capability
he says,
of
no,
weaving
you don't understand.
genes to create, if you will,
And
a
he touched my
trapper basket.
forehead.
You're probably well aware of
And
this. Maybe
I
the listeners
relived
might not
the
have heard of
last
this,
130
where they can put
lives
anything from
that I lived, my prior
explosives to
130
smart.
lives,
It doesn't
all in the
matter
space
what.
of,
And the
a
key,
second or two.
they design a
Mhm.
key
And then
to
when I
open
finished
it at
when I
their
finished that, he said,
choosing,
look down
whether it's
at
something
yourself.
like EMF or whatever. So
And
my whole point
it
where I'm going
wasn't
with this
my
was,
body, it
all I
was
keep hearing now,
Ariel.
is it from
He
spirit
said,
or not?
you're 7
Was
feet
this
tall, you have a
actually
12-foot
the
wingspan,
surviving being, this little
and
one,
your hair
of
is like,
something mixed with
dark
simian, a
auburn, your
simian
eyes are
fetal, bunch
icy
of fetal
green,
cells and
blue,
human fetal cells?
and you're like full of
Well,
piss and
the
vinegar.
Postmole Vu, which
Right.
is the
He says,
Mayan
this is who
story
you
of
truly are. He
origins,
says, you're
says
Ariel. He
that
says, she's a demon
the
slayer,
ET
one of the five
visitors,
that
they
guard the
call
throne
them
of God.
engineers, those who
And he
engineer,
says, you're meant
had
to
produced
do what she does so
us
well,
from a
which
primate
is demonic
ancestor,
removal.
Right.
and that in
And
the experiments that
when I
resulted
came
in
back
us, there were
into my
some
body, it's
other
like,
unsuccessful
I got to look that up
outcomes.
because
So
I'd
they
never even heard of
produced
Ariel,
something.
And,
I mean, if you can imagine engineering
so
something
I
like a
looked it up on the
gorilla
web,
and
and the
then
only thing
finding
you
out
can
it won't
find
work
at
for
that
you,
time
bring you
was
your
her
food,
name means Lion
that
of
was
God,
the kind of
and that she's one of the five
mistake they were coming up in the
guard the
process.
throne of God.
And so it
But
said
the
they
thing
got
is,
to us,
they don't
but
know
they
even a quarter
also
of what she
produced
is.
some ape-like
So they have no
creatures that
clue
live in the
because
forest.
once this
Well,
happened,
Ah,
Michael did what he
that's an
calls a
intriguing
merge
phrase,
or a
isn't it?
blending
Because
to where my
okay.
consciousness and
when
her
it
consciousness
says
are one. And so what she
some
sees,
ape-like creatures that
feels,
live in the forest,
thinks,
did it mean
I
some
feel the same
animals
thing.
or
You can
some
see the same thing.
species?
I know what she's thinking.
And
I
when
know
it
what
says
she wants to
ape-like
do.
creatures, does it
But
mean
it was
ape
getting her to
kind,
behave that was the
or does
issue
it mean
because
something
she was
like an ape?
she was like
Mhm.
on it.
And
I mean,
I
the
think
minute
he
she
put
senses
that
something
story
negative, she
along
like
the
comes
Australian
forward.
stories of
And
the
I have been
Yowie, the
doing the
Chinese
removals
stories
for
of the
some
Yeren,
years,
the American
and always
stories
wondered
of
why people looked at me
Sasquatch,
funny
so on and
afterwards.
so forth,
And it
the New
wasn't
Zealand
until a friend of
stories,
mine said,
Moihau.
Mhm.
you have wings
That
coming out of your
absolutely
shoulders,
fits.
and your eyes
Our
turn white,
ancestors tell us there
and
are
your face and your
creatures
voice are much
like
younger.
apes
I'm like,
that
yeah,
live in the
right.
forest.
I don't
They're
have a
not
mirror. I
apes.
can't
Nope.
see, and I'm a little
They are
busy
like
when I'm doing
apes.
this
And
stuff.
we
Right.
recently did on
And
Fifth
that's
Kind
why people
TV a
always look at me
documentary
weird.
about the Australian
Right,
Yowie. And
right.
just like you're
And I'm like,
saying,
okay,
they're like apes in
whatever.
the
I don't
sense
care.
that
Just get the
they've
job done.
got thick
Yeah,
hair,
that's extraordinary.
but they
Do you
don't
find you
walk
get
like
some
an ape.
resistance with that
And
when you try
the
to explain this to
emotionality and
people?
intelligence through
No,
the
because
face
once they see
is
it,
not like an
Yes.
ape.
they're like on board.
I
Some
know.
of the
Yes.
interactions are more
Okay,
intelligent.
whatever.
So I
Yeah,
think
yay.
that what we are
Just do it.
experiencing all around the world, what our
Okay,
ancestors talk about,
Yes, yes.
absolutely correlate
So,
with
okay,
what the
well,
Popol
that's
Vuh
definitely
says.
interesting.
That
So
private
basically she comes
ancestor
forward and you
produced
just
us
don't
and
even have a
some
memory to
others
come out
that
of it.
from
It's
time
like,
to time
what happened?
we
What's
bump
the name?
into.
How does it work exactly?
I would
No,
have to
how it
agree
works
with you. I
is
know somebody
my
that teaches
consciousness gets
remote
pushed to the back,
viewing.
Right.
I actually need
and
to
she comes
contact her
forward,
because
but
she's
I
agreed to
can
be on the show,
see
and I'd love
everything
to
that
have
she
her on.
sees. I'm fully aware of everything that's
Williams
going
is her
on.
name,
Mhm.
So
and she
which is
is
quite
a remote viewer.
neat in
And I
some
guess
ways
she's
because
been
then I
tested
know
at
what
about
happened.
85%
I
accuracy.
can,
And the reason I
she
share
goes
that
into the
is
demon's
she had
mind. She can
no
pull out the
interest
information,
in
why it's
Sasquatch,
there, what
Bigfoot,
attracted it,
whatever you want
how
to
long
call
it's
this
been there,
being.
that sort of
And
thing.
she was
And
asked
so,
by
of course,
Connie
I get
Willis,
the
who used to be
information
on
at the same
YouTube quite a
time.
bit.
So
I think she's gone
afterwards,
private with
when
what
I
she
talk to the
does,
people, I
to
let
do
them
a
know,
remote viewing
how it
session
happened
with
and why it happened and
a
that sort of thing.
Sasquatch, we'll call
Right.
it.
So it
And
makes it much
she
easier
did.
to
And she knew
deal with the
nothing
human
about
aspect
this
of it.
species, but
Yeah,
the
that's just it. This
information
human
that she
journey that
brought
we're
back
all
was
experiencing.
absolutely
I just
astounding.
want to make
Like
note,
she
Pedro, who
actually talks
said
about she could
he was
actually
once
smell the
asked to
odor.
say,
And
what
we
color
had
were
this
the Buddha's
conversation.
eyes
She
in a
said it
picture on the
was the
internet?
leader of the
Everybody saw them
group,
as
like a
blue. He
very
saw them as
wizened
black.
grandfather, if
That's
you will.
unusual to see that
And
in a
when she
photo,
mentioned
but I
the odor, he
guess,
said, "Well, we think
you
you
know,
stink."
I mean,
Like
every
there were other
photo's, I
words to
guess
use,
it's
but
easy to
I'm
do.
crazying here.
So,
And then
Yeah.
she asked a lot of
okay, so
questions, and the
photo,
wisdom
that's
and
interesting.
intelligence, never
Well,
mind what we see
Buddha,
on the
yeah,
face, and the
demons can make you see them as they they
and
wish to
things
be
like that. No,
perceived.
she never got
And
into their
so they
origin
can
'cause
manipulate
I wish
what
she
you
had,
see,
and I've been trying
so
to
that
find this
if they wish you
interview.
to
It's
see
not on
the eyes black, then
YouTube
you'll see them
anymore
black.
because my partner
Yeah.
Del
That's all about
was really
It's all
interested.
about,
He
you know, how
wanted
they
to
wish
see
to be
this, but
perceived and
isn't
how
this
they
interesting?
manipulate
And
your
it makes
brain.
total sense
Well, I
because it
have to
doesn't matter
ask
what they
because
create. Sorry,
I
I'll just
know
finish this
in
one thought.
my
They
years of
always
doing
have
this,
bits
there's
and
a lot of
pieces that don't
naysayers. You
result
have
in what they
people
wish to
who
create, right?
don't
Go ahead with
believe
your
at
thought.
all,
Sorry.
or they
Yes,
don't
that's right.
believe
I was
in
trying to
demons.
remember
They
the
think that
name
they're all
of
extraterrestrials.
somebody who
Some
had
people believe there
sought
are
to
both.
get some more developed communication going telepathically with North American Sasquatch.
Who might be confused for, you know,
the conversation
demonic. I know that they can use the same portals or bridges or gateways,
coming from the other side that basically said,
so
we
what are your
are part of
thoughts
the
on
same
that?
experiment.
They're two
like
separate
that.
things. I mean, I've
And so when I
communicated
heard that, I
telepathically
thought, oh my goodness.
with ETs.
I
and
believe
the ones,
that
unfortunately, the
what
ones
I've read that
I
is
communicate with,
centuries
I didn't
old.
like. I shut it
This
down
person believes that
because what they were
they've
looking for were
received it
people with
telepathically.
abilities.
And
And it's like, you
I
know,
would
just
want
shut
to
it
meet
down
that person and
'cause I don't
say,
want to
I
deal
think
with
that's
that. You know,
right. I
demons
think our
themselves
ancestors knew this.
are
Let's pool our
totally
knowledge
different,
and we'll find a coherent picture
in the way that
emerges.
they're more.
That makes total sense.
It's,
But the
it's
thing
kind
where
of
I
weird to
think
say,
they
but they're more of
failed,
this
if you will,
world,
the
shall we
theys,
say, than
thinking
you know,
maybe this
than
was
the
a failure.
ETs
But my
are.
true belief about
And
whatever the name you want to use for
it's just
Bigfoot, Sasquatch,
it's hard for
they
me
have
to
access to a lot
explain
of these
because
hidden abilities we're talking about.
it's like I
believe
know a
that they can
demon's
be
coming before it even
multidimensional.
comes. I
believe they
know
communicate
where it's going to be.
telepathically.
I
There are
can
so many
sometimes
things,
it's a year
and
in
these things I
advance
believe
that I know.
absolutely
It's
beyond a
just a
shadow
matter
of
of
a doubt
waiting.
that we
You
have
just
these
wait until the
abilities as
time is
human
right.
beings. Now,
But
the
yeah, they're
operative word
definitely
is,
something
how
different.
do we
They
unlock
have a different
these
energy about
abilities
them. They're
again? Because I think
demons
it's
are created out of a
possible. You know,
complex
healing
form of
ourselves, all
energy,
these things
just
we've been
as the
talking about. Has
angels,
your research
the
been able
angels
to
are.
point
It's
out anything that human
different
beings can do
complexes,
to
different
start
frequencies.
accessing these abilities
You know,
or
it's
turning on that
all you have
switch?
to tune yourself into
Certainly.
it.
Well, I
I
mentioned
mean,
a
my brain
number
just
in the Stars
automatically
of Eden.
does.
The
So
cultures that
it's
have
like, you know, they
curated
speak in
these
Aramaic,
stories
and
of
my
our
brain is
beginnings
hardwired
have
to just
also
interpret
curated
what they're saying.
shamanic and
Whereas, you know,
mystical
if somebody can hold my
modalities
hand,
for switching our brains
which
back on.
only a few people
And
have done,
so the
and they
Mesoamericans
can
who
see
had
what I
this
see,
story about
and they never want to
those
see
who
it again
engineer,
because I
they
don't
have
see
two
them as a
ceremonies,
preconceived notion. I
which
see them
are
as they
aimed at
truly are.
altering our
Their true
brain waves,
image.
altering our state of
And,
consciousness,
you know,
so
if
that
they're
we can
about 7 feet
perceive
tall,
another
they have a
dimension and
12-foot wingspan,
interact
they're a
with
lot like
other
archangels
dimensional
in
beings.
similarity.
And that
That's
is
where it
not
ends.
limited to Central
They're
America.
black, kind of
Plato,
ebony
the
black,
great
some
philosopher,
shades of
2,500 years ago, said he
and
got
their
some of
eyes,
his
the face,
information
or what
that
there is
way
of the
because the
face,
Greeks had their own
is the thing
psychoaffective
that,
tea
you know, that
called
all your
kykeon.
fears
And so there are
nightmares are made
botanical
of.
approaches
And their
that are
eyes are
taken,
either
and
gold or they're red.
Native Americans have
And,
botanical traditions as
you know,
well,
it's like,
aimed
for
at
me,
the
I'm so
same
used to
thing.
seeing them that way, I don't pay no
Aboriginal
attention. It's like, yeah,
Australians
okay, fine,
aimed
whatever.
at the same thing.
You know, but
It's
if
not
you,
something
like,
I've
Zach Bagans,
used
and he held my
personally
hand,
at
you
this
don't
point,
ever want to
but
do
I
that
find
again.
it fascinating. I've
Because
got
he saw
friends
what
who
I
have,
saw.
and when I
He
compare notes
is
with
not
them, once
one to
again,
repeat
the
the
things I'm
experience.
deriving from studying ancient
It's not a
texts,
good
they're
thing.
deriving from these direct
And,
experiences
you know, the people, the
through
few
these
people, the 3
tea
people that
ceremonies.
have,
So that's one. Aboriginal
they've
Australians
never
have
forgot
smoking
something that nightmares are
and
made of.
dance ceremonies
And
aimed at
because
shifting
people say, well, you
their
know, you speak so matter of fact
brain
about it. And
waves
I'm
to
like,
the point where
because it
again they're
is. For me, it's
perceiving this
matter of
other
fact.
dimension that is
I've dealt with them
called
all my
dream
life.
time.
So
Native
it's nothing
Americans
new for
again,
me.
very
It's
similar
what I
modalities
do.
there.
It's
The
God's
one
work.
I've used the
And
most
I'm supposed
myself
to do it. You know, I have no choice in the
the
matter.
controlled conscious
Ariel doesn't give
breathing,
me much
which,
choice
as
either
I say,
because
I
she's
learned
like right
from
on
Eastern
it.
Orthodoxy. And I found that by practicing that in association with other things, so I've gotten into grounding or earthing as well, and sunning as well, and just trying and get my body healthy and in the flow of energies between the sun and the earth, heat energy, light energy, electrical energy, getting myself aligned in that kind of way simply by walking barefoot on a sunny day. It's not complicated.
But I find
but then the controlled conscious breathing, as I've practiced that,
it's like taking someone who's lived as a hostage, let's say, with an attachment for so many years of their lives, let's say, and then
enough
trying to convince them that no, not everything you see is going to be something that you actually are safe.
And there are various
everything that's going on
saints in the Orthodox tradition that I've followed.
Yeah, you need to change that mindset, because if you don't,
proficient.
You'll
those
end
things,
up,
remote
so
viewing,
to speak, infected again,
and then
because you'll just call
powers
them to
of
you.
healing,
You know,
self-healing,
they
and
know
healing
they got
others
your
as
number.
well.
They
So
know
I
who
would
they
point people in those
attach
directions,
and who they don't.
and the methods
And they know,
I've mentioned
the residual energy that's left within them
so
has
universal.
to be cleansed,
You will
because
find an
the dark
expression of
energy
all
will
of them,
remain there,
probably
and
on
they'll
every
attract
continent
others.
on the
And
planet.
people don't understand that. It's not just a case
I think I have to
of,
agree with you.
you know,
Actually,
going and
two
pulling
of
the
the
demon
videos,
out,
and
going
again,
and
when I
killing the
share the
demon.
show that
It's a
we
matter
did,
of
I shared the first one. It's
changing the
because
way
I've
you're
been
thinking
talking
about
to
it,
so many
changing your
people, whether
mindset,
they've
letting
contacted
go
me, it's been a
of
reading,
that.
whatever it's been,
I was in
because
on a
it was
possession
valuable
case where
information, as I
the
know
woman
this
had
show is
had
going to
11
be.
entities in her.
But again, I tell people I'm not
And
trying to self-promote
it was
myself
20
on
years
YouTube,
worth
but I have quite a few videos
living
teaching
like
people
that.
how to
It
access,
was
how to
horrible.
feel
And
color, how to create and
Ariel
feel
was actually out for
energy,
3 hours.
why
She's never out
gratitude
that
is so
long.
important.
But in the end,
Music,
I had
about
to,
raising
I
your
took a friend of mine
vibration, but
who's an
actually
ordained
understanding
minister,
the lyrics
and
and how
my
they
other
can
friend
really
that
empower
forms Ghosts
you.
and Girls.
But the two videos
And
I
I
share the
told
most,
the
one
minister,
is
I said,
called
Aaron, I told him, I said,
How to
you know,
Create
God
a
told me I
Love
have to
Shield.
take you because you
And
fear
it's
the
for
dark
maybe
ones.
you're going into
And
a
I said, and you
situation where
can't
you're
fear
very
the dark ones
sensitive
and
to
do his
energy. I
work.
believe all humans
So
are, but
this
there's a lot of
is, you
toxic
need to
people.
understand,
You can
this
feel
is
it.
all
So
about
instead of
helping
coming
you
from a
understand.
place of fear, I
So
walked
we
them
got to
through
the
how
point
to
where there
create
was
that
just one entity
shield
left,
utilizing the most
and it
powerful
wasn't
emotion on
budging.
this
And of course,
planet
you
I
don't want to
believe,
harm the
love.
individual. So you're
And then
like,
the other one is
okay,
called
and
grounding and gritting.
I know
And I
by
tell people
reaching
the
in
video
into
takes
its
about
mind
5 to 10
what
times
the
longer
issue
to
is. It
explain
was
than
sent
it
to
does
do
to do.
a
So I
job
explain to them,
for
if you can,
Lucifer, and
before
it
your
just didn't
feet
bother to
hit the
do it. Just
ground,
went off and
run
blew him
through
off.
these 2 processes.
So Lucifer
The other
had,
thing that people
yeah.
find
So
amazing
Lucifer
is
had been
how
looking for him for a
powerful
while.
intention is.
Yeah,
So
and he's
you can
been, and it
create
had been
whatever
hiding
you
out in
want
this
with this.
woman.
So you want it to be
And I'm like,
like, say
do you want to go
you're
home?
running into, you're at
I said,
work,
do you want to
that
go back to the
mid-afternoon
light?
crash.
You know, it's
Well,
possible for you to
if
go
you
back to the
believe that
light.
that's what's going to
I
happen,
said, do you
say with
want
your
that?
love
And
shield,
it was
you can get it
tempted.
to
I
be
said, I'll ask
self-healing. You
Jesus
can
to come
create
for you.
whatever you want with your
And my friends are
mind.
like standing
And then
in front of me
teaching
and the
people
woman,
to
and I'm behind the woman.
ground, like you
And
said, or
Jesus'
earthing,
hand came
to
out
connect with
and
the
parted,
center of the
my two
earth. I
friends
call her
parted the
Gaia. You can
ways
call it
as his
whatever
hand
you
came out.
want. I say in the video,
And
but exchanging that
it
energy
changed
that no
its mind. It
longer
said, no, you're
serves you,
lying.
that
I can't
stress, the
go
lower
home. I can never
vibrational
go home.
emotion, and then
And so Jesus
asking the
withdrew.
center of the earth to
And I
send up
said, you had
what
your
you
chance.
require that is
I
for
said,
your highest good. And the
that's
way
it.
I explain it too
And Ariel
is
said,
with
Lucifer, come forth.
photosynthesis. It's a symbiotic
And my friends saw
relationship
this
we have
entity
with the
coming
earth,
down the
because
hallway
we do, right?
towards
And
us.
most
What
people can
they
picture
saw
that and
was,
understand
you know,
it. And
somebody
it's
wearing a
so
fedora and
powerful.
double-breasted suit and
The other
spats.
thing about
That's the
healing
image he
with the
gave
power
them.
of the mind.
Of course, I saw him as
One of
true
my
form.
friends, he has
And he told
created
the
something
demon,
called
you
a
know, you need to come
mastermind,
with me.
where he believes
That's it.
when
You're
2 or
coming
more
with me.
minds are focused on the same thing,
And the demon's
you
like, no, no,
multiply
no,
it
no.
by each other. So
And
10 people
I'm
in the room, you
good.
harness the brain
yeah,
power
and
100 minds,
Lucifer
right?
looked at
But there's a video
me,
he
Ariel, and
shared
said,
with
I know you
me.
don't want me to harm the
There's a
woman.
woman in
I'll be
China
back.
laying on an
And so
ultrasound table.
he
She has a
walked back
very
down the hall and
inoperable
disappeared.
bladder tumor. And there
And
are 3
I said, it'll
ancient
be
monks
over
there
by tonight. I said,
chanting,
you'll
as I
see.
understand, with
So we all
the
left, and my friends are
with the
still in
use of a
shock. They're like,
translator.
what just happened?
They are chanting, "It is
Brother
done.
minister's
It
like,
is done.
I
It is
always
done."
knew
You
that
see,
Jesus
no
and God
cuts
were
in the
there,
video.
and I
Within
always
3
knew
minutes, that tumor
you know,
disappeared.
Lucifer was there. He says, but to see them both in the
So
same
how does that
place
happen,
at
right?
almost virtually the same time,
That's
he
wonderful.
says that
That
just
is
blew my
wonderful.
mind. I'm like, well,
I
you
think
need to understand
there's
that
some
the light is
wonderful
powerful,
wisdom
and you need not be afraid of the dark
layered
ones,
into
because as long as
the
you have
Hebrew
the light,
stories
the dark ones have
that
no power over you.
reflect what you've just
So we
said.
all
And
went
there's
to
a
home to our
moment
respective beds, and
in
about 3 a.m.
Abraham's story
we all woke up at the same time,
where
and I heard Lucifer say
essentially
it's done.
he's been given an
So I called the
impossible
woman the
promise,
next day, and I told her, I
and
said,
he
she says,
pictures
I've
it
never
done.
felt like this in so many years.
And that's how he moves into
ridiculous.
the reality of it. That's
Go
how he
get counseling.
manifests it, to
I
use
said, you have
modern language.
PTSD. Please
And
go
I love the
counseling.
simplicity of putting
you've
it that
got
way.
20 years
Picture
of
it
this.
done.
I said, you need the
And
counseling.
more and more,
You need
when
to
I
talk to
do
somebody. I'm
laying
not a
on of
counselor.
hands or
I don't do
speaking to a
humans. There you go.
condition,
There
I'm
we
very
go.
brief about that. And what I'm doing with my mind is I'm picturing it
Pedro
done.
wants to know what you
I
thought of
think,
the
you know,
movie,
sometimes if
The
somebody presents
Exorcism
a
of Emily
problem,
Rose,
whether
which
it's a
of course is the
physical
story of
problem
Annalise
or a
Michel,
situational problem,
I
right?
never saw it. I never saw it.
we can
Really?
very
I don't watch
easily
I
get pulled
don't
into
watch
the
movies like
anxiety of
that.
that.
I've heard of it
And I
and
certainly
seen
experienced
trailers,
that
but I don't watch movies like that.
Christian
And
going into prayer,
Michael didn't
where
want me
you suddenly
watching
start,
things
oh
like
no,
that in the
this is
beginning.
terrible. Oh
And
Lord,
I
please
started
help
doing
this.
removals. He says
This is
you
a really
have
bad
to
break.
form your
And
own,
the energy you're pooling when you
your
do
own
that is terrible.
take on things.
And if you could
He
just
says,
take a
I don't
step
want
back,
you to be influenced by
let's
these
picture that
Hollywood
fixed.
things and
Let's
by
put our
books and
hands
stuff
over
like
that.
that.
It's a
He
totally
says, this
different
is something
experience,
that Ariel
and
knows
very often a totally different
from
outcome. So that's a bit of the journey I've made as well. Learning to picture things done, because that is
so she knows
exciting, motivating.
She knows
it raises
our
vibrations
you don't
to a point where we can make a positive contribution.
I mean,
these
days
the morass
I can watch
it.
It doesn't bother me. I mean, I laugh because a lot of it is
I'm going
just
to read
Hollywood.
A few comments here. I'm so engrossed.
Whatever.
I could talk to you for hours.
Yeah, to a degree, absolutely. Some of them are way over the top. I thought, I mean, Annalise Michelle, of course, you know, was possessed, did have the stigmata, and did die
likewise.
You know what you're talking about, and we're speaking the same language, even though we may be using different terminology.
I thought it was very well done for what it was.
And like
of course, anytime Hollywood's in something, of course, it's going to be a little bit embellished, shall we say? But I did think, you know, for what it was pretty
understand
well.
what we are.
It was a sad story,
and what we've been told that we're
in that
not.
case, it's a double-edged sword for the priest, because the demons are make it so that the priest goes on trial.
So
you know, I mean, they've got a hand in it.
Said one
always,
thing that cults of personality all share. They are able to convince their followers that they can relate to them.
You know, I find that people
they are the only things that can solve all the world's problems. I have to agree with
their
that.
lives with an attachment in an oppressed situation,
and fear
often don't even have any idea.
Right?
They're just like, oh, I've had things around me forever. Seems like every place I'm moving to is haunted.
They're being silenced right now.
You know,
it feels like I've got a black cloud hanging over
my
head.
because
I'm cursed. All the above. I've heard
many people believing
and
the
it's
leader
not
is
until
like a
you
parent,
remove it where they're like,
and the parent would never do anything wrong. They've never done anything wrong.
But
so they follow, and then they may get a glimpse of something else, and you can't blame people because they're so
after
torn.
Being,
like, what do I believe?
Released,
right?
they don't
but I
do
think
well
we all have that inner sense
never
of knowing
how to
and you've
exist
heard people
without
say it before. I'm going to trust my gut.
It's become a way of life.
So I always say to people, if you're not
and
sure,
things are always easy if you comply.
Because I don't like to tell people what to
right.
think.
So
I say, if this ever resonates with you, please do your own research. But also sit with that.
He said, "Did you notice she was
slowing down your
breathing,
breathing, like
she left her hometown and went away to college,
ask yourself,
far from her family, and she left her comfort zone?" Well, it could be a lot of different reasons. It could be a wrong place, wrong time. She may have been staying in a dormitory that had activity.
Or not, right?
You know, she could have all of a sudden been,
I think that's
fearful of being away from home. I don't remember the whole story exactly.
Everyone,
but there are many different reasons.
Many occasions.
Sometimes a person can be watched by a demon, stalked by a demon for years,
and they said,
and never
"I
even
knew
know
it."
And then when it makes the decision to attach itself,
you knew
or
it,
to influence,
and you didn't pay attention.
Then you're like,
and you didn't take action.
Wham.
And what should have happened, as you say, is slow down enough to register what you know, what your gut is saying, and have the confidence.
And once it's made up its mind,
that you are intelligent.
You
are conscious.
And it's sad for me.
You ask the universe the question. You
it's sad for me when I see people in that situation,
so many of our
no matter how many
greats
times I've seen it,
taught us that we've all got this.
I think it's just how people
learn to slow down a bit.
Some people perceive it to be such an amazing
realize
that I'm in control.
Not only do all of us have glimpses of things we find fantastical, like precognition or remote viewing, but we all have a very healthy gut
because it's just
picks up on things about situations and people and
you can do for people like that. And I've seen people
whatever it
who
might
have
be,
died with an attachment.
You know,
still an
these are
attachment with the
survival
spirit in the
skills
afterlife.
that our ancestors needed. Is it safe to walk on this land? Is this food safe to eat?
There's that
Are these safe people who are walking towards us?
It's sad. People don't realize this
let's
really is
honor
eternity.
how intelligent our guts are, because they were given to us for survival, but also for thriving. And most of us, when we think back to the I knew it.
I've always been.
Those are not necessarily survival stories, but they are. Did we thrive in that moment?
Since like 2009,
and I actually think we're wired
gone
to
out
thrive
there and said, "You need
we
help.
will
Fine,
give our guts enough
get a hold of
attention."
me. I help."
I agree, because
and,
I call that evidential proof.
I can't believe the amount of people that
whether you listen
can't
to
find
it or
help.
not, and if you didn't, and then you find out that it was meant,
crazy.
it was
or
true,
they find somebody
that, and then it is true.
Not
now, there's
real.
2 other things I was going to add,
fakes,
and one of them is
and that bothers me a lot.
Fellow Australian. I know you're not originally from Australia,
that's
but
why
that's where you live
when I start doing what I do, I'm like, I don't want to be called a demonologist because that has a negative connotation. meditation for me
heard of
because
it?
I've dealt with ones that were fakes.
Tell me more.
And my
Okay, so I'll
grandma,
tell
who
you
was
the
from
story
Ireland,
quickly.
and she's been gone
I've got
since
such a
71.
huge must-read
"Listen,
list.
you know, why
Oh,
don't you call
but
yourself
add
a
Ina to
Ina
it.
in
I
Ireland,
love
a
this
demon
book
seer?"
because I share it with people
And I'm
all the
like,
time. And the
okay, that
reason
sounds
why
better than the other.
is she was originally
People don't know
from
what a demon seer is. It's like,
where the
yeah,
nuclear
I said I can
reactor
see them, I
meltdown
can
was
hear them,
when
I
the
can
previous,
communicate with
well, it's
them,
not Russia,
I
it
see them
wasn't
in their
Russia
true
then, but
form,
back
Mhm.
when
I
it
can remove them,
Pardon?
and in certain cases,
At
I can
Chernobyl.
kill them.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And
Simple.
her
Mhm.
brother, they were both little at the
When
time,
you
and her
say you
brother
can
was going to die
translate,
if they didn't
you
move. So her
automatically go.
parents
'Cause I mean,
emigrated
I've got
to
recordings of
Australia.
Galley
And
demonics
she
in
goes on to tell the
Aramaic
story about
Yeah.
how she had to
because
learn
I
a
don't know
new
what the hell
language and
Aramaic
what have you. Her brother
It's like,
did get
what?
better,
Yeah,
but
it's one of the.
unfortunately,
I have a
she
It's
different
old
started
area though.
developing
language.
this horrific
Yeah, it's an old
pain in
language,
her
the
back
old
at a very
language,
young age.
and yeah, my brain is just
Excuse
kind of
me.
hardwired.
By
The
the
minute
time
they
she was
speak, it's like
18, she was
it's
bedridden. Her
hardwired
spine
to
was
translate into
completely
English.
all like
Mhm.
So
almost
it's
like
like, yeah, okay,
not even
fine.
an S, but
Call me
like a
everything but a
winding
white woman.
road.
Okay, yeah,
She
go
was
ahead.
on
Yeah.
exorbitant
Make threats.
amounts of
Okay, fine.
painkillers, but
I'm
she said
laughing
she'd
at
always
you.
been
Fine,
incredibly
whatever you
intuitive.
want.
Yeah,
And
this
she
is a
got angry
fairly
one day. She
lengthy,
had this very angry
it's a fairly
conversation, she says,
lengthy
with God.
audio.
And
Like, I was
again, I'm not
surprised
doing
because
it justice,
usually
but very
you'll get
quickly,
little bits and
she
pieces,
got
but
some
this is a
information,
full-on
probably from, could have been her
lengthy
higher self, could have been her
audio.
guides,
And,
I'm
you
not
know,
sure, but telling her you are
yes,
able to
exactly,
heal
Pedro. It
this.
was the language that
She
Jesus
ended up
used.
developing
Absolutely.
this process of
But it's still
speaking
used in
to the
Syria to
part
this day,
Oh
in
yeah,
the
actually.
body
Yeah,
that
it
needs
is
healing.
still a language that is
And
being in
speaking to
use.
it, just like we had
So
talked at the
I
beginning,
was
that this was
amazed.
an
This was sent to
actual
me by
being in
someone
itself,
who requested
but she
assistance.
calls it
And
activating
out
your
of all
sacred inner
kinds of
healing,
recordings,
I
because they
believe,
would
but it's
record
really
themselves while they
talking to your
were
higher self.
praying
And then
or
she
while they
teaches you how
were
to work with
smudging or
color
doing all kinds
and
of things,
energy and
you
how
know,
to,
to
again, this is
document.
why I feel so
that was an
strongly and
old
have a
demon.
video myself. I do it
Oh,
Old
different than
demons are
she
very
does,
intelligent.
but the
And
process
he's
I use,
he
I want
sounded
the
like he
person
was old.
watching
He
the
sounded
video
Yeah.
very big.
to use what works for
Because
them
of the
rather
deep.
than me telling you,
I've got so
because I
many
think you'll
hours
remember
of
better
demonic
than when you're
EVPs. It's
about
not
to
even
use it.
funny.
You're going, what did
The
she say? What
growling
step
and,
is
you know,
this?
all the
But with
cuss
Ina,
words
and what
but
I love
you know,
about
but they're
it,
in
she
English.
breaks down in this book.
They're in
It's
English.
called The
This
Secret
was the
Language
first
of
one
Your
that I've
Body.
actually heard
The
in Aramaic,
emotions that go
and
behind
just
the old
every
ones have
disease
I like the old
and
language.
every part of
Yeah.
your body and what's
exactly.
Lucifer,
affected with
whenever we
that.
speak,
And she walks you
it's
through
in
how she healed
the old
herself, and
language,
she
and
teaches
you know,
you
people don't
and others
realize there
how
is a
to do
hierarchy.
this.
There is a
That's why I love
respect.
this book.
You know,
Oh,
Lucifer
I've
respects
got to
the
read that book.
archangels,
I
especially the
will send
demon
you.
Sure,
slayers.
I could
I
do with
have
some
a
of that
friend that lives in
myself, I'm
Scotland,
sure.
Yeah.
But I
and
love that
within
aspect
him resides
of
Hano, the
speaking
archangel.
to your body
And Hano
as
and
if
Lucifer
it
were
has
great friends
intelligence
before
and can
It does. She
all
tells
the
you, well,
what you're
war,
saying.
before the
ask
war
it.
came
Like
down.
she said, when
And
you're
so he
Exactly.
drops by to
And you can
visit
ask
him
it
from time to
questions.
time.
because she says we
And it was
have
a couple
gotten
weeks
away
ago,
from
and
that
he goes, Elle was
process
by
of
again. I'm
listening
like, oh,
to
really?
our
Yeah, you have a nice
bodies. It will
conversation?
give you the
And he's like,
answer.
ugh.
The
And
other
I said,
thing
next time
is
he comes
too,
by, I said,
is not
ask
only
him what
asking
his
it, but like I said,
ask him what
sitting
his
in that quiet
impression or his
moment. And like
opinion
I said,
of
again, sorry,
Ariel
my
is.
brain's going a mile a minute as I'm
And he
seeing the
came back.
pages of the
He
book.
came to visit the
But when I
following
share
week, and he
something with
asked him,
somebody
you
that's
know,
going
what
through an
asked
issue,
Lucifer
say
what
it's a
he.
back, there are a
And
lot of
Lucifer's
questions she asks you to ask yourself,
Lucifer's head respect the
including
assassin.
about the emotions. Is this associated with
Yes.
this? Is this? Is this? I
But
always
you
tell
know
people,
what?
please
I
don't send me
think
the
you
answers.
are
This is for you,
correct
and this
in
is for
that,
you to work
because
through.
when
But she
you,
teaches
I know
you how to
myself, I've
take, for
always had an
example, and
unusual
she does
technique.
set the colors
I'm
for
just in your
people.
face, or I
So she will
laugh,
tell
or
you
you
that
know,
if
like, you're
this,
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 and I'm
and
like,
this is
I know,
associated with the
you're just
problem with
like,
your back,
I
and say maybe it's
know, I just
Yeah.
unresolved child
can't,
trauma,
no.
maybe it's
You know,
anger,
and I'm
repressed
not
anger, maybe
mocking.
whatever it may
For
be.
me,
She will tell you
that's
what
just
page and what
no,
color
because
to
that's
use. She will
showing
teach you
strength,
how to make
that's
that ball of
showing
energy and to
firmness,
place it as you
Right.
you know,
activate
You
your
cannot
divine
show
healing
any
intelligence.
weakness at
no.
all.
Now, the other thing I wanted to add when you're talking about human beings being able to thrive. I also
they
teach
know
people how
that
to use your body as a pendulum when you're out,
I'm not afraid of them.
so that you
I
don't
don't
look like a
care.
nut bar swinging.
I have respect for the ones that deserve respect, like the old ones.
Is this good for me?
But
So you
the
can
young
ask
ones, the
your
lesser
body.
demons,
Like
they're
you
like
could have two vitamins, bottles of vitamins in your hand, or one,
hormonal
and say, "Is
teenagers,
this
and
good for
I have no
me?"
respect for
Your
them.
body will
It's
tell
true. The
you.
older ones seem to
Yes.
Yes,
I absolutely agree with that.
stern as they
And it's
are,
learning
because
to
this
recognize your
specific
body's signals.
individual
And
who
hear
was
it
in
again.
existence,
Which one did you
it was
lean
not an
towards?
issue getting
little
rid of even the
cues
old one.
like that.
Get
we
rid
need
of
to learn
all
to
of
pick
them.
up on. I tell you who got me onto this track that we're discussing,
sometimes they'll just send
and
others,
it was my previous cat.
Others will come in, but he never returned.
We talked about cats last time.
2 months, the family,
and I had a wonderful cat called Raoul,
because this had been ongoing for many, many years,
who was
and there was never any other
super
issues.
Smart, very large,
that's
healthy
the key right there.
Until his old age.
You don't dwell on it.
And then
you don't make a big deal out of it.
And
it is what it is.
We noticed a change in his behaviour. When I moved to Australia, he moved to live with my mum and dad.
No, I agree.
And they noticed that they would bring the shopping home from the supermarket,
the older ones seem to
and
be
the cat
the wise
would
ones.
ferret through the shopping bags looking for milk, yogurt, cheese, butter,
because I was
ice
on
cream,
the line with a client,
anything dairy.
And it's
and
like
would wait until my parents gave him some of that.
It was such a rumble, a loud, deep voice that I couldn't understand.
Oh, that's funny. His tastes have changed.
Because I was over the phone, it wasn't there.
Well, a little while later, he came home one evening and he had lost a lot of strength in one of his legs. He was really limping.
From her end.
And they were mystified by this, so they did some investigations, and it turned out my poor cat had diabetes.
I'm pretty sure I actually recorded it. I learned to keep recorders on.
Have you noticed any difference in Raoul's eating habits?
Because I know.
And I said, yes,
here we
he's
go.
been craving dairy.
I know. I know it. They utilize the phones and stuff. I was talking to Jeff Ballinger when he was trying to get me onto,
that's
Ghost
why he's
Adventures.
asking for
He was
dairy.
interviewing me.
I thought, what?
And the demon came through on my cell phone as I was talking to him. He's like,
what
is that? I said,
it needed to manage its insulin, and it could do it by using dairy, which it's never eaten before. If my cat knows that, why on earth don't I know when my body needs to vary its diet?
To the radio,
and that got me on this track of thinking, I surely cannot do this.
It's amazing how they work.
I find that they come through.
If my cat knows how to operate his body, I need to learn how to operate my body.
Once
and
someone
I need to
contacts
start
me and they're trying to
what
ward
my
me
body
off,
is telling me
because
in
they're
the way
afraid.
my cat listens to his body.
Because
so that was the beginning of that journey.
They know Ariel's there.
That is so
and
cool. That
they want to warn me off. They want to keep me from getting the connection with the individual.
But I wanted
I've had people
point
say,
something out.
I've tried to get through to you every which way, and I couldn't get through. And then finally I got through. And I'm like, it's just a negative. Don't worry about it.
They're not able
it is what it is. When the time is right,
the words that
you'll get through because
even
everything happens.
I know I have some stories of people communicating with their children that are not verbal, like a grandmother
you go through it. I guess it's easy
the reincarnated
have an
version of so and so, meaning a previous ancestor, and giving them a wholehearted yes, not verbal yet, like 8, 9 months old.
I've had
wasn't
so
a
many
coincidence
voicemail messages left.
Because I think that we come in with a lot of that intelligence and higher self, right? And as we get older,
hey, Katie,
a lot of those memories.
It is a thing.
But with animals,
I think
I also believe it's because children's work, I believe,
that these sort of things can happen.
The same as animals, and they truly are capable of living in the now.
And the ones that
that's already the past
don't believe. And
you find
they
people
mock,
that,
and then
of course, hearts of gold,
it happens to them,
taking an animal,
and you're the first one they
rescuing
call.
from a very tragic.
It's like I have a local group that shall
these
remain
people
nameless.
Say, like Cesar Milan,
and
for example,
they said,
well,
they were spreading this rumor saying that I'm
he's not invested in
arrogant,
that story because he actually understands that animals.
I know who said it. So I went up to the head guy,
but they are able to move past that because they live in the now. I don't know what's your thoughts about that.
I said, you can call me arrogant.
That is very true. And I do think that is the
gift
I can. Animals give us when they allow us to have them as pets.
I agree.
Certainly observing our pets, we
I might
find
just
our
be
pets
busy that
are
day.
very forgiving. And I use that language, but you could say that there is a now. That happened then, and this is now. And unless you've got a destructive pattern, they're going to forgive you. But for me, having
you walk
my
in
cat
shoes,
sit on my lap
don't
for
do it.
a snuggle because he wants his tummy rubbed and he wants to stare into my face, and he does
clean up a lot of messes.
He's given me a great gift of pulling me into the moment because I can't do anything else in that
going
moment.
around
I can't
video
work.
And audio
I can't read my
and
book.
taking pictures and
I
interviewing
just got to
people.
enjoy the
have
moment.
to really
They will sit on your book,
Which
exactly,
is always nice.
And they're not doing it to annoy you or waste their time or just because they want to be worshipped.
Yeah, exactly.
They are helping us.
One more thing to do.
By
Thank you.
rooting us in the present moment.
Exactly.
There have been so many studies done on the benefits of it. Again, slowing our heart rate,
what is
bringing us back into our body where we are using our physical senses.
There are earthbound.
This is their gift to us.
People that were nasty in life
people
are going to be nasty in death.
There's a deal.
And they can make you see them as a 10-foot shadow person, and really they're a short, fat, balding guy.
I know a lot of people with cats. I know very few people whose cats will catch mice for them, although ours do.
True negative entity.
The deal is the
something
cats make them feel happy.
And has never been
the
able to take
slow
on
them
human
down.
form.
The cats bring them into
they
the
cannot be
present
reborn
moment
into the physical
and make
world.
Them feel content.
The only way they can
and
take on a
is their
human
gift
form
to
is
us.
by possession, nothing more.
I agree with that, and I believe
And there are different classifications as far
but I'm going to share
as
this
I've
with you.
learned
I
over
believe
my
this came from
46
spirit,
years.
but
There are the
especially
minions,
with cats
which are,
and the purr
like
that they
the
have.
shadow person's
Cats
a
don't
minion. The
always
little creepy
choose
crawly
one
dudes that
spot
run
when
around
they
and
lay
annoy
on
me
you. They
are
pick
minions.
various
Then
different
there are the
spots.
lesser demons,
And I
which
truly
I
believe
liken
this
to.
is
They're
with
the
spirit,
younger
shared by spirit.
demons
They
that are
actually
like
know,
teenagers
just
on
like your cat knew
steroids.
what would
They're,
heal
they
diabetes,
want to create
that
chaos. They
chakra
want to create
area in your
pain.
body
They want to
needs healing,
make your
and
life
that's
miserable.
why they choose
And then
sometimes
there are the
top of
old
your
demons,
head,
which
your
are
chest,
I
your
liken to
lap, maybe it's your
archangels
feet.
because they're more intelligent.
Cats of all animals are just
They don't
incredible,
most of the
incredible
time mess
healers,
with
I believe.
us because
I
we're not
agree with
worth their
that. We
time and
talked
energy.
last time about the
And then
healing
there's Lucifer
intelligence
and the
of
three that are
horses.
under him,
Yes.
his first in command,
Anyone
and
who's
the
been
other two.
involved in using horses
So,
to help
like I said, there
people
is that.
with mental health problems
There is
or
that
behavioral
hierarchy
problems
there. If you've
will tell you
got an
that
archangel
the
inside of
horses
you,
know what
it's like
they are doing.
there is,
They
they
know
will
that their
bow
job
to
is
you.
to
They
help
will,
that person to heal,
respect
and
your
they know
wishes.
how to do it.
I've had
I haven't
Lucifer come
witnessed it
and
myself,
ask me for help
but I know
from time
people
to
who are
time.
involved
And
in
it's
that
just a
work,
matter of,
and
because of Ariel,
that is
and he
their
knows she can get the
conclusion
job
over
done,
decades of working
then
with
he comes
horses.
and
And I think that
asks her
it's
for a
at
favor.
it's at a
And in
species level
return,
that there is an agreement
he
between
owes her a
horses and
favor.
humans that this is
So she
what they will
holds
do
on
for
to him
us.
until
We look through history,
she needs him for
and you
someone.
might think, oh, poor horses have agreed to be our slaves, to pull our vehicles and slave for us. No, they have an agreement to help us, and they have got a far more important contribution
military
to human
situation.
health.
If you get somebody below
and
you,
that's what
like
we're
say
now
your first in command,
relearning.
that wants to
Of
take
course,
over your job,
we have
take over your
ancestors who knew
position,
this too.
and they're
But
working.
in our generation, I think we're learning
They
it
think
afresh.
they're working covertly to
No, I
try
agree
to
with you.
undermine
And the only other
you
thing I was going to add,
and
'cause
get
I
you
want
out
to
of
get
that
back to this
position.
ancestry. We got about a
This
half
is what
hour. It always
occurred
flies by so quick with you,
2 years
Paul.
ago.
Is I have
They
seen that
were
firsthand with
creating
animals. My son has
this
severe
first in
autism,
command.
and
I
he's
call
now
him George and
23.
Gracie
And with no
because
disrespect, I may have
it
mentioned
fits
on the
there
last
because they're
show,
both
he's like
stupid.
at that precocious 5 to 7 year old
They were
age where
building
they
this
can be a little
dark
bit
portal, and
independent,
it was
but they
going to be a
still need mom
huge
and
one.
dad for everything.
They
And he's
had
always
used
going to
this
be
human
that way. I believe he
to gather
chose to come to
together
Earth. That's another
all
discussion for
of
another
these
show. I've had much
to
input on that,
teach.
and I
objects which
believe
had
it.
old
Yes,
demons
Came with a
attached to them.
teaching assignment. Yes,
yes,
in one
but
place.
I'm very close
And
to a
with their
very
help,
similar story,
they were
Lorilei, so I
creating a
absolutely
portal.
get what you're saying.
well,
And
then
it
the
was
next
going
show
to
we
be
got to talk
ugly.
about if
I
you're
mean, there was going
comfortable.
to be
But what I
a
wanted to
huge
add
amount.
about the horses,
So
we did try to give
suddenly
him
I
every
get a message
opportunity,
from Michael,
and
and he's like,
although he was
Vegas. I'm like,
nonverbal
I
and going
hate
outside at a
Vegas. He's
very
like, you're
young
going
age
to
of 3 to
Vegas.
4
I'm
was
like, no,
so
no, I don't want to
traumatic
go to
for
Vegas.
him.
He's
The
like, you're
minute
going.
he knew
And
we
then
were
Lucifer
going to
says,
therapeutic riding,
I have a job for
he would be
you.
very calm
I will
in the
owe you
car.
big
The
favor
horse
for
would
this
be
one.
so calm. You're
And
exactly
Ariel's
what you
like,
just said. It
more
was like
than
the
one.
horse
You're going to owe me
knew.
3 big
It
favors.
wasn't a,
Yes.
it didn't
This is a
matter.
3
My
favor
son
job.
wouldn't freak out on the horse system.
Yeah.
There would be other
So
kids maybe that
I
would or
went
have a
down. It
meltdown.
was in the
Nothing
location.
phased
I didn't
these
even have to
horses.
go into
It's
the
like they
location.
knew
But
that's why
the
they
Legion
were
was
there.
there, and we
And it had a
had a
profound
couple of
effect on the
battalions
children
of the
too.
warrior angels that surrounded the
Mhm.
locations that nothing survived.
I can believe that.
Nothing could
It
survive.
did. So I want to ask you now, going
And
back to these
we destroyed
ancestors,
them
because you
all.
said
I
something very
mean, they had to be
profound the last
destroyed.
show.
And if it was a human situation, there would be blood on the ceiling, there would be blood on the walls, there would be blood everywhere. But fortunately, they don't bleed. They just kind of dissolve into molecules. But once that was over, and I told Lucifer, I said, you better be wiser on who you pick for your second in command this time. And he's like, don't worry, I will. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. I still have those favors. I haven't used them.
Just before Christmas,
but that's the kind of thing that
the former chief of space security for Israel,
and for him
Brigadier
to
General, who held that position for 27 years,
came
out and said,
would be a problem. Or like
on
right
the basis
now,
of his experience and his work
out there, they're going against him. They're doing what they want to do,
intergalactic
and some of them are older demons.
A diversity of ET demographics with the stakeholding in Project Earth or Planet Earth, who are
not the ones I've been running into. They
at a covert
have
government
agendas.
Level, and have chosen
I told
not
Lucifer,
to self-disclose.
okay.
Now, when he said that, some might have thought, "Oh my goodness, where's this coming from?"
So he tries.
Those of us who read world mythology and ancient ancestral narratives would recognize what he's saying as a repetition of what our ancestors told us.
These guys are going rogue.
So, namely, that there is a diverse range of ET demographics surrounding us.
That's an issue with the other
agendas
older demons, knowing that he doesn't
and I think
handle
when we look at the
so that's the only reason
geopolitics around us,
because
and the conflicting agendas that we're observing, the culture wars that we're observing. I mean, in the 21st century, we've got
for you to
wars around access to water.
And I
think it's going to be huge in the century
there will be no
ahead. Is that a human right, or is that a right for corporations? Access to water,
he knows she's good at what
access
she does.
to food, to fertile crops
question in
that
the
we
chat.
can see next year's
Ramirez,
crop
my
from,
12-year-old
or is it
sees
all we have to buy it
in her
from
room.
the GM
started
company down
sleeping
the
in our
road?
bed.
So there are farming wars, food wars, water wars,
like
information wars, education wars,
they're so annoying.
War wars. And
the
when we look at
thing
the
to do
geopolitics
is
and
to
ask,
pray.
why is this
the
happening?
prayers help.
What is this about?
But if
I
they're
think there are many layers of answer. You can answer it purely at a human level.
She must be
this country is in competition with this country.
Is usually how it is.
Corporation that dominates this country
to get rid
is
of
in
them.
competition with this corporation. So it's all at a human level.
Do not sage. Because
but
piss them off,
if we accept the language of Intergalactic Federation, Sky Council, there's another layer that we don't
so right now they're just
about.
Kind
the
of
covert government level,
what I can
the
get, they're just
ET
kind of
level, where there are different agendas for the planet and maybe for us as a species. And then we read some of our ancestral stories of the Intergalactic Council, and we discover there are other kinds of being in the picture as well, interdimensional beings. Energy-based beings.
To back off.
Some of the stories about energy-based beings
otherwise
are not very nice ones because they want human pain, they want human suffering, they want human conflict, and they're here to harvest that.
If they
there is some kind of a relationship among these demographics, somewhat at war with each other, somewhat in a kind of a truce. And I think it's the push and pull of all that we're sensing in all the upheavals we're seeing at the beginning of the 21st century. So I don't know if that addresses what you were hinting at there.
Pain in the arse.
They are.
So
the only thing nice
in
about
answer
them
to how we
is
engage with that, because you couldn't listen
they
to
like
anything
their
else.
own.
What do I do?
I'm so glad
I'll just sit down and have a cup of tea then, shall I?
Just stay out, and you can deal with that.
I think,
one-on-one
at the micro level, sitting down and having a cup of tea is probably not a bad thing to do, because if you want to live in the soup of energy-based beings that love human misery, then you have to get back to what we were talking about before, about being very conscious about what emotional state I allow myself to get into. Very conscious about looking after my own health, looking after my own lifestyle. Now, I think I mentioned last time, we've just relocated. Broadcasting from a building site here because we've relocated to a house we're totally renovating
with psychiatrists
because we wanted more space around us because of the impact on the health of that, because we wanted fresher air to breathe, because we wanted enough ground that we can grow more of our own food in. So looking after
usually
ourselves in
if I
that kind
get
of a
like
way,
a call,
in
or
a
if
time
I
of
get
lockdowns,
email or
looking
whatever,
after yourself
I can tell whether there's really something
consciously
there or
in
whether
terms
there
of how
isn't.
much
And every now and
emotional
then I get one that there's
jam
nothing there.
am I getting, to put it that way? Am
And
I
have to
getting
be
time
very
with
careful
people
about how
who
I
make me
say,
feel happy, or am I
it's a
just being
mental
drained
illness,
by
but
the
I don't say
people that I'm working
I say,
with?
well,
How
what's
can I
there
get
is
time
good.
with people
Don't
who
worry
love
about
me
it.
and who I
It's
love?
okay.
We're
They're
having to be
watching over
much
you.
more deliberate about that
If you need
in a time of
help, you
lockdowns.
may find somebody, a
And
counselor to talk
just to
to.
touch
I
on
said,
what you
but
were
you've
talking
only got good
about
ones
before,
around you.
about
It's
setting
okay.
intention.
That
Before
type
you
of
step
thing.
out your front door,
And if they need more
have you
help,
taken a
then
pause
I have somebody
to
that
make
is
sure you're in a place
connected with
where
me that
you
can
are going to
help.
be
But for the
emoting
most part,
joy,
people seem to be
friendliness,
satisfied with the
love,
fact that,
care,
oh, okay, so it's
happiness,
not that,
whatever the
so it's
situation you're
okay,
going to go
we're
in,
good.
is your
Yes,
injection going to
I
be
think
one of
that's where it
love
gets sort of touchy,
and
because
care and positivity, and to set that
can
intention
these
before you
entities
get out of bed,
cause certain
after you
conditions?
finish
Yes, of
grooming
course.
yourself,
But they're
before you
also
step
good
out
at
the front door.
amplifying pre-existing conditions.
These
So I'll say,
things
well,
are
people
how,
suffer
I
from
mean, you talked
depression
about
or
the power of
anxiety,
love as a
PTSD,
shield. This is
addictions. I sort of throw it out
how we
there like that, and
thrive
whole
when
big
we're walking in
bold
a
stuff.
suit of
I'll say then,
negativity,
yes, they can
whether it's
amp it up.
human,
So of course you want to
archonic,
change what's here,
energy-based,
Right.
so that
whatever it
doesn't
is.
happen.
Right.
So
And
at
you
an
just don't
individual
dwell
level,
on it.
yes, that
And,
cup of
that's
tea.
the thing.
Yes,
I'm
looking
like,
after
I
yourself.
know
Yes,
the
making
moment I
sure that
make the
you're doing
connection that there's
everything you can to
anything
be
negative
happy
there. Or
and
if it's
content
just some
and
grandma
healthy.
coming to visit,
At a
Right.
And
bigger
so I
level,
try to talk to
then
them and,
I am
and give them a little
glad Hannah Shed
information
has
on
made a
how to
statement,
tell whether it
and
is, whether it
I'm
isn't,
grateful to people
what
like
to
the late
do,
Ed
that sort of
Mitchell,
thing, so
who
that they
says
can. I
we
try to
must
empower
get
people to help
cleverer in
themselves.
terms of
It's
our
very important to empower people to help
diplomacy
themselves.
100%.
in our contact with
And if they
other
can do
races,
something
other species,
to help
because
themselves,
Ed Mitchell
all the
said, look,
better.
we're a
Like,
space-faring
when I go and do a removal,
civilization now.
or I do a removal
This is our
remotely,
planet,
I
and
usually
we
end up
need to be
sending in
at
black
that
salt, and
table.
I tell
We
them,
need to
this
be
is what you have to
in
do,
that
this is how you lay it
discussion
down. I send all the instructions with it
among
and
the
everything.
Intergalactic Federation,
And I
saying, well,
tell
this
them,
is
I
our
said, one of the
planet,
things I learned on
these
the
are
other
our
side
agendas,
when
this
I
is
was
what we
dead
want, and
was
we
that
have some
thought
friends
becomes
around the
reality in their
table here.
world and in the
Our
dark world.
ancestors talked
I
about
said, and
friends
it's the
from the
intention
Pleiades.
behind the
Our
thought that gives
ancestors
it
talked
power.
about friends from
Correct.
Sirius.
So that,
If we're
your
friends,
intention
let's
is to
use those
protect your home
friendships
by
so
laying
that we're
down this
not
salt.
all alone and at the
And the
mercy
words are
of
just
species
words
with
you want to
higher
say
tech or
because you need to
interdimensional
say something.
capability.
But
You
If
need
we
to
have
empower them
friends,
to say
let's be
something.
friends.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's make that
Yes.
work.
And so
And
that's
that
the
is
best way to
the
do it.
aspect
And
of
I really think that's why I wrote a
exopolitics
medium's
that
guide
I
to
think is so
paranormal,
important moving
and I wrote the
forward. And
dark
one of
side
the
of the
reasons why I
paranormal so
want to
people
break the
can
taboo
understand
around
what
the
they
question
are, how
of
they work.
we're in
They do
company
have
here.
weaknesses.
And the Scars of
They're
Eden
not
is really
all
an attempt
powerful.
to
They
get
do have
people breaking
fears.
that taboo
This
by
is how you
sharing
can
their
protect
own
yourself.
stories and
And people
realizing
need
we're all in company.
people
And
need
once
that
enough
information
of
so
us
they can help
realize
themselves.
that's the
I can't
case,
tell you how many
then
people
perhaps
have,
we're in a place where
contacted
some
me and
of
said,
the
your book
covert
helped me so
government
much.
can
It helped
become
me
a bit more
understand what was
overt,
going on.
and we can hear
It
a
helped
little bit
me
more
all the way around.
about what's
And
happening
it's
at
good.
that leadership level
That's what it was
to
written
look
for.
after the planet
Mm-hmm.
and to look after
No,
us.
I agree. Empowerment. Acknowledgement is empowerment.
Because
Yeah.
You really
everything you
can
said, I
create
agree
your environment
100%.
to be
And
many
the thing
things,
is,
and these things are just waiting
even for someone, say
for
like
that
my
for
son,
that
to be able to explain
invitation.
this,
And
like he's
children
been
I
playing
find
Call of
are the most
Duty.
vulnerable because of the whole
And he thought
shape-shifting
that
thing.
Mr. Biden was
They
the only
can
bad
come
guy. So I had
across
to
as
explain,
being
no, I'm not
a
calling
little
him a bad guy.
friend, a
No, I'm
little
not saying
animal,
that.
playmate.
Because he hears stuff, right? He
Yeah,
sees on
exactly.
YouTube.
It's easy
So I
to
said,
get
no,
an
that's not what
invitation.
we're talking about.
Right.
So I
So
actually had to
they
explain
gain your
the terms
trust,
of
Yes.
and
white
then they move
hats
on
and
and they
black
start
hats
doing
if you were
little
playing, but
having
there's
you do little
bigger
things that you're not
players
supposed
kind
to
of
be
thing, right? But
doing,
the whole thing I was
and if you
talking
don't
about
do
with
them, then they
stuff
turn nasty. It's
was
like, yeah,
because
okay.
even somebody at that
That's why I
developmental
tell people,
level
if you're on an
gets it with the
investigation,
point
if you're in a
that
location,
when you
if
get
you
angry,
see
when you're
something that's a negative
sad, when you're
entity,
jealous,
do
when
not
you're
acknowledge it,
raging
because
towards
to
what you
acknowledge
really
it is
think
to
you're
make it
seeing,
see you,
I said,
and you
that's
don't
food
want to let them see you. You don't want to make them see you. You don't want to stand out.
We want to give them, he only eats 6 foods.
You want
he understands
to
the food
remain
thing very
as
much.
inconspicuous
So,
as
you've
possible.
never had a vegetable in your life, right?
100%.
I said, well, when you send them
so
love,
let's say
you
something
send them,
comes in.
you're happy,
What should people
all
look
these
for?
good emotions. I said,
If
that's
something
like
comes in,
sending
okay,
you
if
broccoli.
you're
That's what you're
if
sending
you're trying
to
to
them. He
differentiate,
was able
like
to understand
whether
that.
it's human,
and that's where
negative
my
spirit,
frustration
or if
sometimes
it's
sits, is that
or if it's an
people
inhuman.
are fighting
Okay,
over
well,
the silliest
human
things. And
negative
you know what?
spirits,
There were times
you'll
when
get the
you
cold
say
spots.
a personal situation that
There's
you would
more physical stuff.
understand.
You'll get the cold spots.
When he
They may
was
move
little
things.
and he was nonverbal,
The hair
there were
may stand up
times
on the
when
back
he'd
of
be
your
raging
head, your
for
neck,
3 and 4
arms,
hours. All
whatever.
you could do was hold him.
And
So he was
they may
safe.
talk
Everything was
to
safe.
you. They
And I
may
don't
try to
share it
push
for
you,
pity.
things
I
like
share
that.
it for
Okay,
this
that's
reason.
a human
Is
one, and
I
they're easy
actually
enough to
believe
get
this
rid
came
of.
from spirit.
You
And I
you
was sitting there
can,
one day
tell it
and
to
I
get the hell
heard,
out of
if
your
this doesn't
house.
make any
You
difference,
may just,
10 minutes
sage
from
it,
now, let
whatever.
alone 10
Those
years
are
from
the easy
now,
ones to get
let
rid
it
of.
go
If it's an
and
inhuman,
pick
you're not
your
going
battles.
to have
And
those
that's which
physical
what I wish the
traits in the way
whole
that there's
world
cold
could see
spots.
right now. That
What you're
it's
going to
almost
have
like,
is you're
don't
going to
notice
feel
the little
cold on
man
the
behind the
inside
curtain
of your
from the
body,
Wizard
the
of
core of
Oz,
your
right?
body.
If we
It's
could
like
just all
it
put
could
our
be 100
differences
degrees
aside,
outside, but
agree to
inside you
disagree,
feel like a
and
block of
unite
ice.
as a human
And
race,
you may get,
imagine what we
the air
could
may
do.
feel heavy and thick and
Exactly.
stagnant.
Exactly.
You may
If
get this
we
horrible
could
feeling
live
in the pit of your
more
stomach.
emotionally intelligent
You may
I love
see
it. Yeah.
dead
as
animals,
cultures,
insects.
then
Things can be
we wouldn't be
attracted like
governed
that. You
this
may
way.
smell
And
rotting
obviously
meat,
we
flesh, or
long
you're
for better
growling.
government. And
Yeah,
we
here, growl.
probably, if we're in the
Things
West,
like
we
that. They may
long
try
for
to
more
scratch you.
democracy
If
and
they try to
more
scratch you or
equity.
bite you, it's
But
usually the scratches come in
we
threes
have to take
because of the mocking of the
responsibility for
Trinity,
who
the
we
Father, the
are
Son,
as
and
a
the Holy Spirit.
culture. Because
That's
to an
their calling
extent,
card.
the
Or they'll be
leadership
rapping
that we're
on the
provided
walls or
with
the
will
windows or
reflect
whatever, the
the
floors,
culture that we are.
in
And if we're
in
all
rhythms of
emotionally
3.
intelligent enough
That's
that
what
we
they
can't be
do.
manipulated by a demagogue or a xenophobe, then it's not going to happen.
Pretty much
I agree.
And maybe we just have to say, well,
although they have been
we
changing
deal
recently,
with the cards we have. And that's about shaping our culture.
Adapting.
And then leadership will
they're
have to
evolving.
leadership.
Demons do
We'll have to
evolve.
catch up with the reality
Recently,
of that.
in the last couple of years, I
So
ran
how do we
into
engage
a couple
our
that,
friends?
if they were human,
Our friends, because
I would say
that
they
was
were
my
psycho.
next question.
And because
Are you
they
anticipating that we
don't,
may
usually a
see
demon will travel
first
with its little
contact,
creepy
or do
dudes,
you think
some
that
creepy
it'll
crawlies,
just
like
sort
a
of
shark
happen?
with
Do you think
pilot
it'll be
fish.
planned, or
But
how do
these
we
two
engage
didn't have any of
with
that,
our
didn't
friends
react in the same
intergalactically? I
way.
understand how,
Their thinking
and
was
there are many
totally
people
off.
that do, but there's probably a lot
I
of our
went into their
listeners.
minds,
This
and
may
it's
even be
like,
new to them to
holy
hear about
crap,
AT
you're
involvement in
insane.
this whole
You're not
conversation we've had.
acting normal for a demon.
Well,
Even the
let
other
me say
demons
something
don't want
left
anything to do
field
with
here.
them.
Okay.
I'm like, ooh, that's pretty
In
bad.
the New
And
Testament,
I'm like, okay, I'll just
in
off you
1
guys, and
John
then we don't have to worry
4,
about it.
is a little verse from the writer John talking about
There you go.
channeling.
Just like that. So Pedro says a
And
human
to
negative
be
spirit are the
discerning
dead
when
people
you
who
do
wish
your channeling,
bad on you.
that not every
They're
spirit
dead
or
people
entity
who are
that speaks
nasty
to
in
you is going
life,
to be telling you
and
the
they haven't
truth. So
ascended,
be a
so
bit
they're going to be
discerning.
nasty in death. They
Now,
retain
Christians
their lovely
might say,
personality.
what? That's in the Bible?
Because Pedro, it's the
Because that's not part of
essence
Christianity.
that
No,
makes up
that's right.
the
It kind of
individual.
got
It's not the
edited out,
physical.
like I
So if the
talked about
physical
earlier.
ceases to be, the
But
essence
go back to the
continues.
beginning, and the
So if
apostles
you're
knew
bonehead
about
in life,
that.
you're
They
going to
knew
be a
about being
bonehead
in
in the
communication with
afterlife, and
entities
now you're
that were not
kind of
human.
in trouble because
Some of whom
you don't know
are
where to go. You're
benevolent
grounded. You're
and
stuck. So
helpful
you
and
just
here
keep
to
on
assist.
wreaking havoc. And once you've realized
So
I can wreak said havoc, then it
I
becomes a
mention
game.
that because it's one of those
fun.
taboo
Right?
areas,
So
certainly for
they like that.
Christians.
So
And then
so
because
people
of that, for
who
mainstream
tend to attract
society, channeling is
these
regarded
things
as
sometimes
like a
by
fringy thing.
chance,
It's not fringy at all.
children,
It's been central
people
to
who are
every
grieving,
culture around the
mental,
world. And
mental
in that
disabilities,
passage,
illness,
to use an
mental
example, it
illness.
doesn't
Yeah.
say
people
what or who the
that
spirits
are
are.
actually
It doesn't
people that
say,
are
well, these are
in
your ancestors, or
clergy
these are
will attract them.
interdimensional beings, or this is
Unfortunately
your
for them.
higher self. Could be
And
any of
even
those.
like
Doesn't
not even
say.
devout
It just
Christians,
expects you
Catholics,
to be in
whatever. For
conversation
whatever reason, they'll
And
attract
discerning.
them. I know that
and
they
discerning.
try to
That's
get a
right.
hold of
So I do
the
think there
clergy and
is, just
stuff
like we
because it's
talked
like a
about,
feather in their cap.
the
If they can
possibility
turn
of
them away
information
from
about
the
Sasquatch
light
coming through
into the
channeling
dark.
earlier. There's information you
And
get about all sorts
they're
of
also
things through
attracted by
channeling. And I'm learning to give a
clutter,
lot more
chaos.
respect
They
to people who
like
have
chaos.
developed
chaos. They like
that
clutter.
ability.
It's like, okay,
I, through my
whatever.
research for the Scars
You
of
know,
Eden,
if you're in
now
an abusive
believe we are
situation,
in a soup
whether
of other
it's,
entities,
you
and it
grow
is
up from
possible
an
to
abusive
communicate.
situation, or you're
So if we're
currently in an
looking for
abusive
friends
situation,
and for
if you're
wisdom in
being
how to
treated
move
for mental
forward, then I
illness,
think we need to
you know, if you have
embrace
abilities and you
that
don't even
aspect
know
of
you have
things.
abilities, and
Other races who were communicating
putting
with
things
us
out
through
there and you don't
channeling.
even realize
It doesn't mean they're spirits
they're like,
or
ooh,
they're energy-based beings, because I think there are other species very similar to us who this is how they communicate.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Wayne says,
And then in
where
the
do
Scars
young
of Eden,
demons
I
come
invite
from? Are they
people to
born or
share
otherwise
their
created
own
in
anomalous stories.
fine
Stories of something
way?
funny happened to me years ago. I've never gotten my head around it.
Okay.
And I don't quite remember
right
what
there at the
happened
bottom,
next.
you can
If we
see
can
it.
all
Oh, yeah,
pull
there you go.
stories like that
In order
that
to
we
answer
all
that,
journey with,
you have to understand where we come
then
from.
I
in the
think we'll
beginning.
begin to notice
So
stories
at
about
one
another
time,
presence
we had,
among
God and I
us.
sat
And
down
I'm
one day and had
talking
a nice
about
conversation about
presence
this.
of beings
He's like,
that with
in the
religious
beginning,
language
said
we might
we
call
were,
angels, or with ET
we had
language
physical
we might
bodies
say, I think
in
there are some
another quote-unquote
Pleiadians
galaxy far, far away.
wandering around here, or some
And that's
Lyrans, or
where
some
God
Syrians
found us,
wandering around here.
the greater
If when we
consciousness, is
begin to
whatever you
do
want to call
business
it.
with the idea that there is
And
another presence here
he
that is
helped
here to
us
help, and to be
grow
willing
and
to
evolve.
pause
He
and
helped
notice
us
that,
to
well, that has to
stop
proceed
warring
engaging with
between
it.
each other,
So I
stop the
would suggest
hatred,
that. We mentioned Chernobyl
curing
earlier,
diseases.
and
In the end, it was all about the
official
pursuit of
news
knowledge.
agency
That was a
at
big
that
thing,
time,
the pursuit of knowledge,
I think it
and
was Pravda,
having that knowledge help,
reported
add to,
that for
the
several
perfection of their
hours,
society. But
reactor
they
number
evolved over
4,
time
that if
into
it had
pure energy.
exploded,
And
if it really had melted
it took,
down,
Right.
it
thousands
would
of
have done
years to
a
evolve into pure energy.
Fukushima
Once
to
they
a
did,
quarter of
and once
Europe.
everybody was
It
through
would have
evolving,
been a catastrophe.
we traveled as one
And it
unit,
didn't
so to
melt
speak.
down. And
Throughout the
the
galaxies, everywhere.
newspaper suggested
We
there might be a
traveled for hundreds of
connection
thousands of
with the
years,
fact that it didn't melt
seen
down, and
everything
the
you could
fact that for
see,
several hours there was a
and
UFO visible to hundreds of
just
people
experiencing everything
hovering
we
near
could
that reactor.
from that point
Now,
of
I
view.
hear that story,
And then there came a
and
time
I
when
find it very encouraging,
most of
because it
the
suggests
souls
some
said,
of our
listen,
friends are not
we'd
only
like to be
present,
physical again.
but they're
We'd like to have
helping.
children. We'd like to
And
know love.
we need to notice
We
it,
want to do
and
this.
then we need to engage with
And
it.
Lucifer and his
Yes,
followers
there'll be
said,
things
no way,
going
man.
on at a
I'm not
covert
going
government
there. I
level
do
that you
not
or I
want to be
might not know
subject to a
about,
shell, to
but you or
pain,
I
to
might
growing
have
old, to
contact as well.
disease. We
And
do
when we
not
do,
want that.
let's
And God
ask
said,
some
I'm not going to
questions.
force you. It's all about
Let's
free will.
get
He's like,
some wisdom.
Lucifer was, of course,
Should
waiting
I
for
be
his
doing
chance.
something different?
And he
Is
said,
there
no,
something I
it's
should
all,
know?
you're forcing
And
us.
tap the
So that's
wisdom
what
that's
started the
available,
whole,
whether it's
quote-unquote,
person to
war between
person
heaven
or
and
through
hell.
channeling. I
And
just
once
think
the war
these
was
are the
over,
baby steps,
and
if I can put it
Lucifer
that
was
way,
disarmed by
in
Michael,
walking
and
into
his
this
son was disarmed by
territory of
Ariel. And God said,
a
I'm going to give
populated
you
universe
exactly
where
what
we
you
want
want.
to stand up and take
I'm
a more
going
adult
to
place.
make sure that you never are able to take on physical
One thing
form.
I'd add, and I
He
want
says,
to
but
hear
you
your
can't live
thoughts
among
on it,
us.
because we got just a
So he
few more
opened up a
minutes,
rift
is
into a dark realm.
meditation.
And
Would you add meditation to
they
that
ushered
list?
him
Because
in
I
there,
do channel, I
and
do
there were
automatic,
Yes.
guards
and
at
I
the
will
opening
warn
to the
people
when
I'm
rift.
connecting with
The
spirit
rift
very
was
quickly.
closed,
And
and
if you
Azrael
asked me years
and a
ago
few
if it would have
others
been
are
an
on the
angel
other
or a
side,
guide, now I'm
waiting
open to
for
whatever,
those
as
that
long as
want
it's
to
coming
change
through
and
with
come back to
something
the
meant
light.
in love
They've had a
and
few
for
takers
people's
over the
higher self.
centuries, but
I'm willing to
not very
entertain
often.
that what
But
I
they
might
also
have
have
thought
eyes and
was an
ears on
angel
the
could
other
very
side,
well have
which helps
been,
me,
or could be
with
somebody
the
from
connection.
the Pleiades, or many of
And
the places,
so
Lyra or Lyra,
that's what it is. They
being
are the
Syrian,
younger ones are
whoever
the
it may
last
be,
ones to
as long
evolve.
as they're coming in love, like I said, and for
Those
people's
are that's
highest good. But
that's how they're quote unquote
meditation, all the
created.
incredible
Right,
experiences you
right.
can have
Very
with
interesting.
beings and the
Zach,
questions
you're
you can
hilarious.
ask. You
Nobody
can hold
panic, I've
classes.
arrived.
I've done
Okay,
crystals.
good.
Never
Welcome.
mind how
Okay, now that we know, we're
amplify.
good.
But go ahead. I'm giving
We're
you a
all
chance
good.
to talk
I
about
was
it.
right in the world of the other
Absolutely,
realm.
yes.
Yeah, we're
To
good.
Gang's all
meditation.
here.
I mentioned that I was a
All
fan
right.
of Eastern
No,
Orthodoxy
that
and the
is
Hesychast tradition,
interesting
which is the
because
controlled conscious breathing.
I've had
There's a guy
people
who was very
with-
developed in that called
when it
Saint
comes to
Seraphim of
certain
Sarof,
demonic
who lived
entities, that they
1759 to
feel that they still
1833.
have
And
deep
he had an
inside that there
amazing
are those who
ability
still feel
in
they
receiving
can still feel their
information
compassion. They
from
can still feel
somewhere
love
else,
and affection.
accurate
There's a
information,
little bit of
insights
light
that then enable
left
him to do
in
healing
each
among
one of them.
people.
But
Yes.
most of the
And
time,
he
they
said
squish
that
it
the key
down
to it
because they
was to
don't want to go
acquire
there with it.
peaceful
Every
spirit.
now and then I'll come across
And
one
so what whatever
that
modality
doesn't
you
do
use
that.
for that, whatever
One
method you
such
follow,
demon is
I think that's
one I
step one
kicked
for
out of
getting
a building,
clarity and getting information
and
from
I'll
these
call him
other
Herb.
sources. And I see meditation
Next time I
in
saw
that
him,
context, or what
the
other
first
people
time I
might
saw
call
him, he was dark.
mindfulness.
darker than dark.
Yes.
And,
and then the
I
next
talk
time I
about
saw him, he
some
was
mindfulness exercises on
like
my
a
channel,
really,
the Paul Wallis channel.
like a charcoal
I think if
gray,
you
but only
alter your
lighter.
state,
And I'm like, Herb,
get
what's
into
up
a
with
place
you?
where you
What's up with
are
that? He's like, I let the light
peaceful,
grow. He
relaxed,
says, I
awake,
need your
and
help. He's
alert,
talking to Ariel. He says, I
and
need
then pay
Ariel's help.
attention to what happens
I need
next.
for her to speak to
So
Lucifer.
with that
He
as a
says, I
framework,
want
then
to
yes to
be
meditation.
a go-between
absolutely.
between the living
I love it
and the
because
dark
I
realm.
actually call it my
He says, I want to help
and
facilitate,
I'm very creative,
you know,
and I'm constantly
getting
doing
answers,
something
stopping
to create
things.
or use my
And I'm
hands.
like,
I never realized
okay.
why I love it
And
so
Ariel
much,
knows
but
that he's
part of it
sincere
is
in
that
it.
I've tried the
And she
conscious
told him, she says,
breathing.
okay, I'll
Love
talk
that.
to Lucifer
Sometimes I'll
about it and
use
see what he has
binaural
to say.
beats. When I've
So
gone
a
to
couple
sleep
days
at night, turned
later,
it down
you know,
very
she
quiet
talked to
with the
Lucifer,
headphones.
and he
My
said,
brain
well,
is
if the old
open, the
ones
subconscious is
are
open. You get a
on
lot
board,
of
then
interesting stuff
he can
and
do
things
that.
that way.
Right.
When I'm
So
channeling,
a
that's
couple
where I
days
was going with
later,
that.
I got a
Like I said, my
response for
brain
him,
always works so
and I said,
fast that I
listen, they
realized I
said that
never
they're on
completed
board
that
with it,
thought.
so
When
it's
I'm
okay.
channeling, I will
So you
warn
can
people
that'll be your
because I'll
job.
start talking faster and faster and
And
faster
so
and
he's
faster,
been
and
doing
things will
that
just
ever
start
since. It's
coming.
been
I
the
won't
last
remember
couple
what I've
years.
said, and
Mhm.
you
And he comes
know
to me from
it's
time
being
to time
channeled.
with a problem,
And it's
and
not
it's
that
like,
I'm
okay,
so
yeah,
special.
whatever,
I believe
no problem.
anybody
So
can
he's
do
sort of a
this. You just have to
go-between
quiet the mind,
Between
between
the
dimensions
be
and
able
Mhm.
to
between
yeah,
slow down the
yeah,
the dark
body,
realm. Yeah,
yeah.
retrain
interesting.
our
That's
bodies
it makes
how
you
to
wonder
listen
why
to
you would
our
want to
bodies and
be
what we're
the
connecting with
liaison,
in
so to
these
speak, as
quiet
Pedro
spaces,
says.
right?
Definitely.
Well, it's
And something I'd add to
his
that
reasoning
is
is,
storytelling.
you know,
Yes.
if we stop a lot
My
of this
daughter,
needless
I think it was last year,
pain and suffering
for
for the
just as
white
she's
light
preparing to go
souls,
to bed,
which are inhabit
she
the
said to
bodies,
me,
he says,
I was
then
just
there'll be a
thinking
greater understanding.
about,
And that's
there
what
could
he's
be
seeking,
other
is greater
beings,
understanding between the
wandering
two
around,
sides.
even
He'd like
wandering
to
around
stop the
our bit
whole
of Canberra, and they're watching us,
situation, but he
and they're kind
knows
of
that
laughing at
he
us
can't do
because
it
they're
alone.
saying, oh, look, everything these
Unfortunately,
guys have
not.
is
I
stuck
think,
to the ground.
I mean, we have
They don't know how to,
humans who
they don't know how
are
to manipulate
dark
gravity. Now, she
individuals
was
who think
11 years
nothing of
old when she was
causing
saying this. And they're
harm
laughing at
to
us
the
because
living,
we
to
live
their
on the
own people.
surface,
Right.
You
and
know,
everything
I
we use
mean,
is
most
stuck to
people
the
would say, look to
ground.
the governments.
And I
You know,
said,
it's a good place to start.
Evie,
Yeah.
what,
You
that
know,
is very
not
possible.
naming any
That's
names.
exactly what's
Right,
happening.
exactly.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Agenda, hate
She
mail,
said,
Joan
yeah,
Tattoo,
actually, I thought
Richard,
that as well.
Garen Network.
But she had
But,
told it
you
to
know,
herself as a
religion being
story
another,
first,
you know,
and then
control
reflected,
and things
oh,
like that.
that could be true.
You know, so it's very
And that's just a
difficult
little
to
picture. I think when
imagine,
we get into
like, that's not
storytelling
something you can
mode,
just stop, because that's a
we can often
machine
find ourselves
that has
speaking
picking
truth
up
without
momentum
realizing that's what we're
It
doing.
has been
single
going
And
hour,
some
every
of our
day.
script writers use that.
Exactly. That's
But, you know,
They
I
use that when
applaud
they
him for
write
the fact
books,
that
when they
he's
make
willing to help.
movies.
He's willing
Some
to
use it when they
start
do
something in
stand
that
up.
way.
Yes.
And they
And
come
he
away
has
thinking, oh my
others
goodness,
that
what did I
have
just
decided to help.
say?
Yeah.
I was
So
just
he's
trying to
got
be
about
funny. I was just
12
telling
others
stories,
that are
and all
helping.
this stuff came
And
out.
so he does
I
what
think
he can. And
that is
when he
another
can.
kind of
So,
aspect of
you know,
channeling
it's like
without
God says,
using the
you know, he
word.
says,
Absolutely.
everybody
When we
blames
get
me
into
when something goes
storytelling, our
wrong. You
minds are
know,
in a
why do
different
you hate
place,
me?
and
Why are
we
you
start
punishing me? He
receiving
says,
and
I don't
processing
have to do
things.
anything.
Your
You guys are good
daughter
at
is
messing up your own
brilliant. Out of
lives.
the
Hey,
mouth
I don't do
of
anything.
babes. And I want to give you time. We just
You
real
guys screw
quick
up your
to
own
have
lives,
people
you
tell
know?
you. If you can tell
Yes,
people where to find you,
exactly.
your amazing
So what is
channel,
your take
books.
on
Please come
one
Okay.
who
back,
you
Paul.
get to,
You've
let's
been
say,
so amazing.
I'd love to talk
one or
more.
maybe one
So
The
other
Fifth Kind TV.
who
Go to the Fifth
has,
Kind TV on YouTube. Go
let's
to
say,
the
a
Paul
lineage,
Wallis channel on
who
YouTube.
has followed
Go to
along with a lineage
paulanthonywallis.com.
for,
Anthony with an H.
you know,
Wallis,
thousands of years.
WALLIS.
Oh, a
paulanthonywallis.com.
demon, you mean?
You can follow
Yes.
what I'm doing
That's
there.
followed
You can
like,
go to Amazon,
are we
Barnes
talking
and
about like
Noble,
what
Kindle,
people
wherever
call
books
a
are
curse,
sold.
where
Get hold
there'll
of the
be,
Scars of Eden,
Nope.
Escaping
Who's
from
just
Eden.
been
And if you go to my
there's
YouTube
mention
channels,
of
that's where you can
this
get into a
specific
conversation
one
with me.
throughout
awesome.
generations,
And I'm
going back
like I
as
said,
far
Paul, I can't wait
as
to have you back.
couple
And I
thousand
know,
oh,
years.
yeah,
well,
yeah,
you're one of those
the Pete
people I would never do
the
the same show with
offenders,
because we
repeat
just go
offenders,
wherever
yes.
the conversation
Sometimes,
flows.
you know,
And I
from what
That's
I
right.
understand, in a very protective
Lorilei,
nature.
thank you for having me
maybe an
again. I love my
overseer
conversations with
type
you.
of
We never know where
situation
they're going to
because of
go,
that
and
specific
that makes it
bloodline.
fun.
I know you're such a
Yeah,
pleasure,
they're
and I
not
want to
as
tell people I'm
prevalent
going
as you
back
would
tomorrow
think.
night with my
But
partner in crime, or
when
as
I
I
do
call her,
run
my
into them,
bestie.
which
She
is
is
very, very
surfing Hollywood,
rare,
tripping the boy from
but
9 p.m.
you know,
to
we sit
11
down.
p.m.
They're one of the few that I
Central,
will sit down and have a
10
talk with,
p.m. to
That's
12
because I want to
a.m.
know why
Eastern.
they're doing
And
it,
if you ever
what
want to get a hold of
started
me, you
it,
can
where
find me
they're,
on
where the whole
Facebook.com/the
concept of it
Angel Rock if you
was
ever want to book a
created and when
reading,
it was
healing
created and
session, even some of
things
the
like
things
that.
Paul and I have talked
So
about
we do
tonight.
have a nice
That's part of my
communication.
practice. I also
Ariel
do
does.
some
Ariel does
mentoring.
not kill it.
You know what? I've been
She,
getting some signs from
because there
spirit
is
too.
that
A lot of
respect.
people are asking a lot of
She
questions,
does,
newly awakened people.
make sure that
So
she
I've been
sets down her
promising some
boundaries and
courses. So I think that's a
limitations,
sign from spirit. It's time to get those
and
courses
they
out
must
there
adhere
and
to
start
it.
teaching people about some
And
of these things
with a
we've
mutual
talked about and
respect,
energy and
that
things
does
like that.
happen.
Also, lastly, I want to
I
add, I have
don't
2
think
groups on
I've
Facebook,
ever heard of any of
Paranormal
them
University for all
that have
things
not respected
paranormal,
those
and the
boundaries.
Angel Rocker Tribe
But
for
you have
many
to
of the
sit
things
down
that
and
we've
talk to them.
discussed
You
tonight,
have
pretty
to
well,
find
anything
out,
esoteric, energy-wise, and
where
so
this
on.
began,
I
where
want
they
to
want to
thank you
go with
again,
it,
Paul. I
what
cannot
they
wait
want to
till I have you
do.
back on again.
And
And I
it's
want to
not
thank
all
you
about,
everybody that
creating,
is here.
for
I
not,
send you
for
all so
not
much
every
love and
demon
light.
is
Have
all
a
about creating
beautiful
problems
evening,
for the
morning, or
humans.
afternoon, wherever
Like I
you may
said, you
be.
get these ones, and a
I
lot of
think
the
we're still
times it's
live.
a
Joe
question
likes
of
to mess with
a matter
me.
of studying
We'll
this.
see him if you see sleeping in the
Studying
background.
why
thanks,
humans do
Lorilei. I
the
really
things they
enjoyed it
do,
today.
and why the
Thank you,
souls,
Paul, and I mean that. I would
white
love to. I
souls
could talk
will,
to you for hours. You're just an
cause problems
absolutely
in the physical
fascinating,
world,
wonderful
and
human being. I
they're
can
just not,
understand why your
they're not
daughter, at the
understanding
tender
why.
age of
So
11,
they're
came out with
all
such an
about
incredible
studying
concept.
and
Amazing.
becoming
Yeah,
aware of
amazing.
it,
And I'm glad I
so they
was
can
there
get
to
a
hear it.
greater
I bet,
understanding.
yes.
They're
Well, thank
about
you so
getting a
much for
greater
being here.
understanding.
I will be in touch, I
Okay.
promise.
I
All
tell
right.
you,
And I look
Ariel
forward to
tells them,
next time.
trying to
Yes.
understand the
You,
humans,
you
might as well
have a
hang that one
beautiful
up.
rest of your day, and thanks so
Because
much for
you
making
can
time
study them all
today
you
to be
want,
on.
just don't
No
interfere.
worries. All the best. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thanks.
Bye.
It's like
Bye.
a prime directive.
Yeah. And you have to set
Now we're
boundaries and
still live.
limitations,
We're
because
just
if you
waiting
don't,
for
they're just going to
Joe.
do what they're going to do.
We'll see if
And
he's
they
done.
fear
Thank
her
you,
enough
everybody that was here
to
tonight.
adhere
Gotta
to the
love
boundaries and
Paul. Oh,
limitations.
thank you, Zach. He said, great show
So
tonight. Thank you, Paul,
it's
once
just,
again
it's
for
an
joining us.
an
Have a good night,
uneasy
everybody. See y'all
truce, so to
tomorrow night.
speak.
Definitely. And I will
Right.
have Paul back again.
Yeah,
He is one of
well,
those
yeah.
fascinating,
It's
incredible individuals.
it's
He's kind
definitely
of like our
something that
friend
I
Dan
found
Willis. I've been bugging
intriguing.
him to try and get him
Let's
back
put
on.
it
He's
that
been
way.
so,
So
excuse me, busy. But I could
guess
have him
time
on
will
probably
tell.
every week. Either him, Paul, or like I
without
mentioned,
talking to
Dan.
too many
And
people.
you never do the same show once
So,
or twice.
That's true.
Okay.
You're there.
Myths about what will protect you from
Hello.
negative entities.
Hello.
We're all
Oh,
done.
it's
I was
everything.
just